please act.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Items for discussion today, we have impact fees for the beach school rebuild, side street ingress, egress versus Estero Boulevard, density and fee schedule. First on the agenda is the discussion for impact fees for beach school and the rebuild.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
I promise I won't abuse this parliamentary maneuver, but I would ask for unanimous consent to proceed out of order to allow John Koss to speak this morning. John is a member of the ad hoc committee of parents that have been working with the superintendent's senior team. I've been part of that. Jackie Lisak has been part of that. He has spent, and the parents have spent hours and hours studying this issue, and they've been liaisoning with all the whole senior team for the superintendent. And I think he's got some comments this morning that are germane to our conversation. That it's a little unique, but since we don't have a big crowd, I thought it would be appropriate with unanimous consent for John to speak out of order.
I certainly don't have an issue with that. I met with the superintendent yesterday. I met with Mr. Koss last night. So if I don't have an issue with it if my fellow members do not.
Be fine with it.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Good by me.
Mr. Koss? Turn your mic on, John.
Well, look at one sec, John.
Thank you very much
There
for
you
giving
go.
me this opportunity. I didn't know if this was the proper forum, but in speaking with everybody individually.
John, you may want to formally introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm John Koss. I am a business owner and a resident of the island. I have a kid in the beach school, and I'm a member of the ad hoc committee committee that's been discussing things with the superintendent's staff. I'm finding it difficult just because of the way our laws are set up and our communication is set up, and to try to let everybody know where we're at and what we think is a good path forward. So I felt like I wanted to take the opportunity to come up and just throw out to you guys what I've been talking about with the parents and with their staff, and where I think, and I think we think that the proper direction to go is here. The district seems to be talking about renovating our historical building and putting temporary portables behind the building and giving us, 3 to 5 years in them portables to come up with some enrollment objectives, and if we meet them objectives, build us a school. If we don't, then we're out of the district, and all we have left is our historical building. They're saying them portables are going to cost them $3 to $5 million a year. So if you work that out over 4 or 5 years, we're at $15 or $20 million for portables. I feel strongly at this point that is not in the best interest of the town. I feel strongly that that historical building could be renovated to get our kids back on this island next year, maybe all in that building. They haven't given us a total answer yet. They've said we can fit them all in there, but programmatically it might not be best for the kids. Well, programmatically what our kids are dealing with now is not best for them. So if we were put in that spot, the other thing that's come on the table is the library. I know there's differing opinions if the library would work or not. Mr. Adderholt's been with us at the meetings. I'll tell you that I do have some hope that that library could help on the top floor alleviate to where if we couldn't fit our kids in the historical building, we could overflow them and some of them in the top floor of that. But then I go back to the money that they're talking about spending on portables, $15 to $20 million. A way better use for that money for our taxpayers and our town is to take that $15 or $20 million and start building us a school in the back. If they say they can't build the whole thing for that, that's fine. Build us what you can. And then at the end of 5 years, we've got a brick and mortar facility on this town that if we meet their requirements for enrollment, then they go ahead and build the rest of our school. If we don't meet their requirements for their enrollment and they want us to go charter, which you know, we know that's where their head is, then we have a brick and mortar facility till we could put our best foot forward and start making it happen. If at the end of 5 years we're not able to meet the enrollment for whatever reason, and then portables go away, and all we have left is that historical building, the future of this island having a school is going to be very difficult. So I just wanted to come out there and throw that out to you guys. This is something that I'm talking with their staff about, just as one person or whatnot, but I wanted you guys all to hear it so you could think about it, and you know, as the discussions, you know, progress or whatnot, you could keep it in mind.
Well, since you're up there, John, we might as well see if any of the council members have questions for you real quick. As you have said, you and Vice Mayor Adderhall have been involved in this heavily since the town hall meeting. So is there any council member that has a question for Mr. Koss?
Yeah, I would say, well, thanks, you know, for what you're doing. I remember being at the last little meeting and hearing about this, you know, putting in these temporary buildings and then wanting to turn, you know, potentially turning over the town with this huge liability of a $3 to $5 million a year temporary structures, or you have to pony up the money to build, and that would be after a lot of the emergency funding is gone. So I do agree with you that that becomes a problem. But, you know, a lot of the conversation, there was some of the parents that made a point, was that the enrollment in the school is largely up to the district, because they determine the area that feeds the school. They determine whether it's school choice or not. So it seems like putting that on us when we don't have that much control over it is difficult.
And I'm sorry, I didn't give the whole context of the meeting yesterday. We've talked to them about the enrollment plan. We met with their consulting firm, their demographer, last week, and we didn't get a warm fuzzy out of that meeting. So we sat this week, and Pat Van Ness did some great work on putting a modeling together for our for discussion with them. They took our model yesterday. I think Jim will attest they were okay with the assumptions that we made, which could put us on goal to get to 150 kids in 5 years, which seems to be the goal that they want us to get to. But as I approach this bill, at least from my perspective, I'm trying to break these two issues out separately. I'm trying to look at our permanent structure of our school on one facet and our enrollment on the other facet. They've talked to us about, you know, well, if you can achieve your enrollment, then we will build you a school. Well, I've told them if I don't have a school, it's going to hinder me in building my enrollment. You know, if I don't have the facilities, how are we as a community going to go out to parents that are building multi-million-dollar homes here, because we know that's what's going to happen, and try to talk them into sending their kids to our school if we don't have a school? It's impossible. So although I agree the enrollment shouldn't be just solely on us, they have made commitments within our enrollment plan to increase some of our proximity, to allow us to engage FGCU to have a magnet school, which would bring kids in. So they're working with us on that. They're part of the solution on the enrollment. I'm just trying to look at these as separate issues, not the same issue, because if we put it all together, I think it gets too convoluted, and I think there's too much risk in what I believe our long-term goal for our town needs to be, which is to have a brick-and-mortar school there in any case scenario.
And I think, too, that one of the headwinds that we have is our town is shrinking. I mean, between the 2010 and 2020 census, we lost 12% of our population. And that's not a good thing for school numbers, for any numbers.
Right.
John, before we lose you, yesterday was a pivotal and historical day for the parents of the beach school. You want to touch a little bit about what happened with the bus situation on the same day that the school in Sanibel, which everybody's happy for, the folks of Sanibel, their school opened yesterday. They had a grand ceremony, as they should, and celebrated that moment. At the same time, I'm sitting in this meeting with these parents, and they're staring at their phones, desperately trying to get their kids home from school from probably a 2 to 3 hour bus nightmare experience. Do you want to talk just briefly about the symbolism of that and how difficult that has been for the parents?
So in the morning yesterday, our kids waited 1 hour and 10 minutes for the bus to come. It was a personnel issue. Quite frankly, I think it was the first time their bus driver had been on the beach, and I think she got overwhelmed and turned around and left. But regardless, our kids waited 1 hour and 10 minutes, and then in the afternoon, it was over 2 hours. We had kindergartners through 5th graders standing standing in the street waiting for a bus for over 2 hours. This morning, I was on the phone with one of our council members at 6:45. The bus was a half hour late this morning. And this goes back to my whole point that we need a brick and mortar school on this island, because if not, that's going to be part of this town's future for the rest of our lives. Busing's always going to be an issue. Traffic's getting worse in this area. If we have to bus our kids off the island, that's going to be the reality of what we have to deal with here.
So, John, when you talked about, and I agree with you, I mean, how can you improve enrollment if you don't have a brick and mortar building to put the kids into? And we've talked about it. It's, I think, changing the lines and, you know, the residential lines or, you know, school lines, whatever it may be, district lines. But I also think that there's a huge opportunity for us on the beach in recruitment that we've never taken advantage of. And as all these new places start to open again, if we advertise the recruitment of getting our servers in, our hourly employees, everything, their kids can come to the beach school. But again, to your point, without a brick and mortar, they're not going to be able to fit them in. So when you go along those lines with the superintendent or, you know, the school board, what are they saying to that?
Well, yesterday, because of the process and the communication, it's tough just to communicate with them. And we don't get much time sitting and talking from them and, you know, negotiating, if you want to call it, or whatnot. So their understanding of yesterday was that our only priority was to get our kids back on the island next year. And that was our only real priority. I discussed with them that that is not our only real priority. Yes, I want my kids back on this island. I plan on living on this island for a long time, and we need a school on this island. So when I approached this thing with them, the enrollment and the fixed building, I told them that as a constituent of yours, when you brief this, if this is how you plan on briefing it, then I don't think you can present this as a doable solution. We cannot build our enrollment without the facilities. So there was a little angst on their part, but I think they understood where I was coming from. And I don't know, we talked about at the end of the meeting changing their courses of action, which caused a little, I was on the phone with them this morning. They're feeling like that, well, you know, you keep changing your position. And I'm like, it's not that we're changing our position. It's that our position is evolving. We're understanding how you're maneuvering us, and we're not liking in the direction that we're getting maneuvered. You know, so we're not changing. Our goal is to have a brick and mortar school here, and our goal is to have the kids on the island next year. This thing that I'm talking to you about now provides both of them. It's not change. What it is it's compromise on our part. We're not asking you to spend $15 to $20 million for a portable campus. We're asking you to take that same money, put it in the school, and get our kids back in the facilities that I've talked about. So we feel like we're compromising. I'm not 100% sure how they're going to present it, Karen. They did commit that they will reach back out to us next week and give us the course of actions that they're going to present. But until I see them, I don't know how they're going to take to it.
All right. Councilor King, you have any questions before we wrap up with Mr. Koss?
There's a hard deadline, isn't there, or is that still soft, of the 22nd of this month?
There's not a hard deadline. On the 22nd, it's not a workshop. At a workshop that I believe we all attended, there's no public comment. They're going to have something called a brief, which will allow public comment. And in my understanding is these new courses of action that they're telling us they're going to share with us next week, they're going to present them formally to the board on that day. No decision will be made. They said coming out of there that they will get feedback from the board to where the board would say maybe I like this, go forward with this, hash it out a little more. Maybe they'll say combine these two options and come back to me, and then the vote would happen either in the first session or the second session of March. I believe it's the second week or the fourth week. We did express with them our strong willingness to get to a decision point with this. We feel like the time's not in our favor, and we see Sanibel kids actually going back to school, and we would like a decision to be made and find out where we're at.
So,
Go ahead.
no, I was just going to ask, is there a specific time or where and all that type of thing?
I'll provide that to you.
Okay.
I don't have it offhand. I believe the 22nd is the date of that, but I don't know the time, but I'll get that over to you guys.
Yeah, the 22nd is essentially what we're doing today. It's their M&P. It's just a planning session. So, as you said, there will be no public comment.
No, there
allowed.
will be. The way they're doing that
changing it.
meeting, they're
Oh, they are
allowing
changing it.
public meeting
Oh,
on the,
okay.
that's
didn't
what
know
they
that.
told me yesterday. They're going to allow public comment on the 22nd.
Okay.
It will not be like the workshop where there wasn't any. They're calling it something different that gives them the levity to do that.
Okay.
I just want to say thank you, John, you and the other parents for all your hard work. I've been reading, I guess, on some social media areas that people don't believe this council is behind you. So please understand that we are, and we'll do whatever we can
Well,
do.
I'd like to tell everybody out there that I talked to every one of these council members offline, and that this council is strongly behind the school, and we greatly appreciate that because we need your support.
Thanks.
You guys have a blessed day.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Well, we'll bring it back to the council. Vice Mayor Adderholt, I believe this was one of your items that you wanted, so go ahead and start us off.
Yeah, the way it's described on the agenda is discussion for impact fees for beach school rebuild. The deliberations with this ad hoc committee have evolved from there. A couple school board members and there was some discussion from the staff that would we be willing to consider that in order to save the school. And of course, the council put it on the agenda. We're obviously willing to consider it. But since then, we had a very interesting meeting yesterday because the overall premise of the school district has been the cost per student. And in fairness to the school district, it has been demonstrably high. A lot of that's because the school district has not worked with the town to sort of address some of the long-term issues that the school has faced. And we're working on those issues in this collaborative group. And the senior team from the superintendent's office has been great. And their demographer has been extremely tough on us. As Councilor Veach said, our population is not growing like it should, or like it, I shouldn't say should, it's just the nature of the island's development. But having said that, after the demographer kind of gave us his opinion, Patrick Van Ness, who's again one of the parents and who's also a city planner by training, put together a model based upon some of the assumptions of the school board. And I think it's so important that my colleagues hear this because it really addresses all of the concerns that at least have been publicly put forward to the town, to the parents, to the teachers, etc. And that's this cost per student issue. So Patrick put this model together, and I'll keep it very simple. But it included some suggestions to the credit of the school, to the staff of the superintendent, expanding the school's proximity zone, create a magnet school program. What Karen referenced to this marketing program where we work with the chamber to let the employers and the employees know, and even some of the workforce housing that's been proposed by some of the potential development on the island. And again, the estimates for the impact of these were very conservative. So none of the staff winced when Patrick laid this out. And they all nodded like that's reasonable. I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but they all seemed to think that that was reasonable. So under that assumption of this model, we reach 176 students in 5 years. That's the goal. That's the challenge. And if we can't meet that challenge, then as John said, there's the charter school option. We certainly need a physical school to have that be an option. But at 176, the average cost per student, and we were corrected by the CFO for the town with the numbers, but according to his calculations, that puts us at $9,600 per student, which is less than half of what we're currently paying now because of the expansion of the enrollment. And that's what the original ask, you all were at the meetings, they asked us, could we get in sync with the schools around us? That puts us in sync in terms of cost per student of the schools around us. That addresses exactly what they said their concerns were. So the cost per student dynamic is no longer an issue. And as John said, so that's one issue. The other issue is we need a school, a physical school, in order to attract these types of numbers with all these various programs we've just talked about. So the solution is close. It's in hand. And I'm just hopeful that we can push it through the finish line. And again, these parents have just been spectacular. These are parents, we're driving out to the school district offices. You know, it's an hour and a half drive in traffic. You know, they're trying to figure out how their kids are getting home tonight or yesterday evening from school. I mean, they've got all these calculations. They're doing all this work. They're making all these calls. I mean, and they have jobs. They've got kids, the young kids. And I don't think anybody on the ad hoc committee is actually living in their actual home. So, you know, this is an extremely onerous burden on our parents at a time when it's a tough time for everybody on this island. So I think I want to dispel this concept of enrollment, because with the various, to the school district credit, with their cooperation, we have a path to reach that enrollment goal that addresses the cost per student number. And I think if the school board hears that, I think they would have had a legitimate concern prior to that, but now we have a path, and if we can just get the physical plant taken care of, I think we have a road to a solution, assuming everybody is, well, I don't want to assume anything. I work under the premise that everybody's working in good faith, and I'm hopeful that we can get there. So I don't think we need to formally discuss the impact fees at this time. I think just to be able to tell the school board members who had asked about it, there is a willingness to consider it, but I think at this point, we've addressed the enrollment issue, and so I think the impact fees are no longer, at least, we don't need to formally spend time this morning. If at a later time the school board directs us to go in that direction, we'll certainly consider it, but at this point, I think we've addressed those enrollment issues. So the particular line item on the agenda today, I think, is either delayed or unnecessary at this point.
You know, I met with the superintendent, the manager and I met with the superintendent yesterday and had a very good conversation. And I think your summary is very much on point. I think that there is a path. I think we're getting closer to that path. I agree with you that, you know, how you get to the money is a discussion for later. I think what I took out of that meeting yesterday was that they are fully aware that this council is behind the teachers or behind the parents to have a brick and mortar school here. I think the issue now, and this is just my opinion, is what that looks like. Is it a newly built school? Is it the trailers, the portables, in a combination? What is this school by definition going to be over the next 5 years? And I think that's where the discussion we could have, since it's on the agenda to discuss the school, maybe not necessarily the fees, but I think as John pointed out, the $3 million a year plus the difference in the cost per student compared to other areas is a very important discussion that is going to have to come up, whether you build a new school at a cost of whatever that is versus what it will be yearly. And is that a cost that the school board pays? Is that a cost that they expect the town to pay? I think those are the discussions that are important. You know, I don't want to keep reiterating, but I think you're correct. I think that figuring out a path where the town can work with the school board, with our local businesses and the community to get those enrollment numbers up, to bring that cost per student down, I think that's been addressed. I think it sounds like everybody's kind of on the same page. It's now the hurdle to me seems, what is that school going to be? I think that they're still willing to work with us to figure out what that is. I don't know that drawing a hard line in the sand is probably the best way to go about this. I think you need to keep the communication open. I think if we could do anything in this meeting today, if we could come as a consensus as a council to kind of give them direction as to what our appetite is as far as working with them, whether it's financially, we don't have money like everyone else. We're all dealing with heavy financial issues since the storm. So I think we need to come up with some sort of informal, formal, if you will, direction that we can get to the school board so that when they have their meeting on the 22nd, they know what our appetite is as far as our willingness to work with them. But again, I want to stress, I personally don't feel it's the best time or the right decision to draw a hard line in the sand to say it's this or nothing. I don't think that would be received well, especially in the times that we're all dealing with. But I think we need to keep our minds open. I think we need to keep the discussions open, but give them some direction as to where we feel we want the school here as the end goal. So with that, I'll bring it back to the council here and open it up for any discussion as to what the Vice Mayor said and what I have said, and try to see if we can provide some direction from council for the parents to help work with the school board.
Just one last point, Mr. Mayor, then I'll yield to others. One of the things that was interesting yesterday is it was very clear that the money from insurance and from FEMA is there to rebuild the school. Now, there's some confusion and discussion and debate about how long that money will be available and could it be used elsewhere. But the bottom line is the school district has the money through insurance and FEMA to rebuild our school. So that it was an important point to get delineated, because it's not, and when I say build, we're obviously renovating the historic building, and then we have to build the outlying buildings or rebuild, or there's a lot of discussion about that as well. But the funds are there. And the fight, of course, is to make sure that they're prioritized and utilized here in Fort Myers Beach, and that's certainly been a big discussion point. So I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Start with you, Councilor Woodson. You look like you're ready to say something.
She's got her finger on the button.
She
there.
does.
It's a game show.
Exactly.
Okay, when you're talking about the funds are there, that was my question. Grants, FEMA, how do we go about getting this money? I mean, do we go to our state legislatures? Do we go to DeSantis? How do we go about pulling this in?
The school district has it at its disposal. They were insured. They've got the ability with their FEMA consultants to make application for it. They've got their private insurance. They have the money already not physically in hand, but they have the process in place to recover this money through claims and through the FEMA process to pay for the rebuilding of our school. And they acknowledged that in the meeting yesterday. So there's no...
So is there further pressure that has to be put on them by, not necessarily directly by us, but around us?
That's a very fair question, Councilor Woodson. And as we get closer to the school district formal meeting and informal meeting, depending on how the process plays out, I think the members of the school district, it's important for them to know that those funds are available already within the Lee County School District as part of the disaster recovery. And so it's just a question of prioritizing them towards the use of Fort Myers Beach to build a new school. And so I think, I don't want to say it's that simple, but it is that simple.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I didn't touch on that. And I certainly do not want to speak for the school board. And well, let's just assume for a minute that the money is there, as you said, through FEMA. We all know how long that process can
And
take.
private insurance.
And private insurance. So maybe let's take the money out of the equation at this point. I think, and again, I don't want to speak for them, but this is just my understanding or my read or what I assume or I take out of my meetings with these people, is that building the school is one thing, not the unknown. I mean, it would be, and it's probably not the best analogy, but imagine building something and then 5 years we don't meet that metric, and now you've got a building that they no longer can afford. Does the town then come in and take it over? And I think that, to me, it seems like where the hiccup is, you want to call it a hiccup, but where I think the discussion point should be is if the money is there and the school can be built. I don't believe that they're firmly against building a school. It's, we don't know, as John said, how we're going to be able to guarantee that we're going to have 150 students there in 5 years, and nor do they. So I think if I was in their position, I would think the same way. Well, if we build it, will they come? Right? Is kind of what we're getting at. So how do we bridge that gap between the money's there and we're going to get you the students to fill that building?
I think that's an excellent question, and the bridge was gapped yesterday by John, with great pain, I think. But he said, if we don't deliver these enrollment numbers in 5 years, we're willing to have this evolve into a charter school. And that was that seemed to be of some comfort to the superintendent's staff.
Well, you'd have to
John,
come up.
hold on,
Hold
John,
on
hold on.
a second, because there's a couple things.
Come on up, John. Make sure you turn your mic on.
That's why what I'm proposing now isn't the complete build-out of the school right now. I understand that's too much risk for them right now to build a school for 150 kids. But if we were to take the money that they were going to spend on the portables anyway and put that towards a brick and mortar solution, then we could still keep our enrollment objective in place. And if we meet that enrollment objective, then they build the rest of the school. If we don't meet that enrollment objective, then we've got some brick and mortar facilities to start with. And when you think about it just in a holistic thing, they're going to put portables behind our school or in their solution. And let's say we meet the enrollment objective and we come up with 150, okay? Then they're going to build us a school. Well, we got portables sitting on top of where our school needs to be built. So what are they going to do? Shut our school down? Move the kids out of there? I'm just thinking of a more feasible solution to where I'm not asking them to spend any more money than they're willing to spend in the beginning, but it puts us on a path towards a brick and mortar school as like a compromise with them.
Let me just interject a couple, because I think the real crux comes to not only the 3 to 5 year down the road, but then how do we get there? Because just to summarize, my feeling is that if they build a school and in 3 to 5 years we don't come anywhere near our numbers, then they're with this. They have this school that they really just don't have use for. But if they just put portables there and it's 3 to 5 million a year, and then at the end they say, well, you don't have the enrollment, you can continue this, and then we have to pay $3 to $5 million a year. I mean, because that's the losses they have from having the low number of students is what, like 1 million something a year. So that's a huge hole.
We know they're not going to continue to pay it, so that would be our reason, and that's why, and respectfully, I'm trying to, and I don't know if I communicated rightly. I'm not trying to draw a hard line in the sand and say, it's this or that. I'm trying to work with their solution and say, if you seem like you have the willingness to spend $15 or $20 million on portables, because the library, in the best case of scenario, if we were able to use it, and we might not be, but in the best case of scenario, the library is a short-term solution. So they could build us something. If it's a $20 million budget, they could build us some level of facility behind the school, which gives us an operational school, and then we continue to work towards them enrollment objectives. If we reach them, we stay in the district. If not, I'm going to have to get schooled up on what we have to do to start a charter school here. But regardless, I believe that is compromise, and I did talk to one of the board members this morning because, to let her know. I think they were getting some messaging from some of the parents on the beach that we want a temporary campus and we want a permanent school because that's what Sanibel got, and we're not going to expect any less. I understand from a parent's perspective how they would want that, but I also understand the situation that we're in, and it's much different than the situation Sanibel was in. So I think what I'm proposing is a compromise solution.
And I would just kind of say that I think one kind of point that we could discuss is what can we do as a town to encourage them to build, and that's kind of where the thing about the impact fees. But any kind of is it possible, or would it help sway them if we were to have skin in the game in this school? And the other thing is, if we were to have a commitment that maybe at the end of 5 years, if they don't reach the enrollment, which I'm a little hesitant to do because they control those numbers more than we do, that we have some kind of interlocal agreement, which we will, either through a charter school or some other kind of activity, we will take over the school in
Bill,
that
if I could
time.
just speak to that. They have control, but the things that they do have control over, they've showed the willingness to do. To let us have the magnet school, to open up school choice. That's really all the control they have. That is a partnered relationship to where with the school choice, to where we start reaching out to our businesses, we start reaching out to FGCU, to where they are going to give us the commitment, at least in these discussions, to give us the avenues to build that enrollment. But this isn't something to where they look at a map and draw a circle and say, you have the kids. This is going to take a community effort to make that work, but they're going to give us the tools to be able to do it.
And it's,
Go ahead, and then we got to get back on track.
yeah, I was also just going to say that, we, in some of the things we're going to be discussing today, that the town council also has to make commitments to try to stem this exodus of people from the town. And I'd hate to get to the point where someone like you and other parents are looking to move off the island because it's just untenable to have a school that's so far away and so difficult for the children.
All right. Thanks, John. And I think that, we need to get to exactly what John, I think, brought up. There was a lot of talk yesterday about interlocal, and I think as a council, we need to discuss and decide if that is an appetite that we have to work within an interlocal, whatever that would be. We don't know that yet, but I think it's important that we let at least their board know if we are or we are not willing to work within an interlocal agreement with them to achieve both getting the school built and getting the numbers up to where it's reasonable for everybody to continue to operate. So, I'll start it off. I'm fully willing to enter into an interlocal agreement with the school board to achieve the 5-year goal to get the school built, to get the students. What that is, I think we'll have to have those discussions later, but I think it's important today if we can at least let their board know our willingness or unwillingness to work with them through an interlocal so that they can discuss it at their meeting on the 22nd and get us that much closer.
So I know we have to move on, but just one last thought, and this is thinking way outside the box, and I don't know if it's even possible. But so Sanibel opened. Do they have room to put our kids and our teachers in Sanibel so that they're not going clear across Fort Myers town, everything else, and just do it for maybe the rest of this year? Or is there any possibility there?
Not to speak for the board, but I believe yes, and it is something that I've spoken with them about, to where I don't want to speak for everybody on this island, but if we've really got pushed into a tough spot to where only so many of our kids could fit in the historical building, we couldn't fit them all in, and the library wasn't an option, that maybe we could go back to our community in a compromised effort and find a way that 1 or 2 of our grades went to Sanibel for a year or 2 until our school got built. That's painful for me to say, and I'm not speaking for everybody else, but if we're talking about true compromise, the school's that important to the island, where I know as a parent, a member of this community, I would make that sacrifice if I needed to.
Thanks, John.
Mr. Mayor, to your point, I agree with you, and I strongly support an interlocal agreement. Again, the devil's in the details, but I do think the interlocal agreement concept gives great comfort to the school board that will meet our commitments, and quite frankly, it should give us some comfort because then it'll ensure that they will meet their commitments as well as we work out a compromise agreement.
I'm in concurrence with that.
Totally agree.
Sure.
Well, I think there you have it. I think John, if you want to pass it on, or Vice Mayor, or if they're listening, I want to thank the parents. I want to thank, our council, and I definitely want to thank the school board. They have been listening. They are paying attention. Their willingness to work with us and our willingness to work with them, I think, will get us to ultimately where we all want to be. Cooler heads always prevail, as we all know. So as long as we're keeping these line of discussions open and our willingness to work with them, I think we will get to where we want to be. In every negotiation, nobody gets everything they want, but you get to a point that everybody can live with, and my hope is that we can get to that point. So if there's no other discussion on this, we'll close this and move on to the next, unless, Town Manager, you have anything you want to add? Okay.
Matter of procedure, should we, Vice Mayor Adderholt said he wants to remove the impact fee discussion. Should we keep something on our agenda for the school / interlocal, whatever you want to title that?
Yeah, it's not that I want to remove it. It's just that this is a fluid dynamic, and I think if we need to consider an interlocal agreement, I'd defer to John from a parliamentary procedure. We could just put that on a regular agenda, couldn't we, for a town council meeting to formally approve an interlocal agreement?
Well, wouldn't we would have to know what the interlocal agreement is.
We would have to have that conversation,
Right.
obviously, with the school board. But as the council was discussing this issue, in not having an opportunity yet to necessarily confirm with administration whether or not we're actually collecting this. In 2001, the county, under its powers as a charter county, at that point in time Lee County had converted to charter county, did in fact adopt an ordinance, which I can distribute to all of you all. I found it Vice Mayor, after we've had the initial discussion regarding this issue. And so I'm letting you all know that there's an impact fee countywide that includes the municipalities that is supposed to be collected for schools. Whether or not the town of Fort Myers Beach is doing that as part of the issuance of building permits and the collection of impact fees at that point in time, which is when they are collected, I don't know. And whether or not, if that, in fact, whatever that money is that's being generated through that impact fee, if it's being remitted to the school board.
No, and I appreciate that. I think the interlocal agreement at this point is going to be really more of a formal agreement about the various metrics in place.
Correct.
So we meet our enrollment goals. They meet their promises to help us meet those enrollment goals. Whatever we decide to do on the physical plan itself, if it's the school itself, the building of the school, it just codifies all that in some kind of an interlocal agreement. And again, those conversations are ever evolving, Councilor Veach. So I'm assuming when that does happen and when that's ripe, that our council and the school district's council will formulate some kind of a draft of an agreement that would come before the full council, probably in a more formal setting, as opposed to an M&P. We could talk about it at the M&P, but I don't know if that's ripe yet. But it could come quickly, and we just don't know.
And I think that one thing you made, because I know that several people on council, most vocally you, Jim, has said that you went to them and challenged them, what can we do? But now the question is, kind of got down to a little more detail. What can we do to help encourage you to build the building instead of put temporaries in? And because I do say, if they put temporaries in and we end up inheriting that huge bill in 3 to 5 years, that's a poison pill.
I think you heard Mr. Koss share similar concerns. So you're absolutely, that's a very serious concern.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
over here. I said no too soon. I would like you to know that we are following the issue and will continue to do that. We're also looking at, are there some funding type strategies or other strategies that are employed by other local governments to support this type of a school. So we are following it, and we'll just continue to do that and then look for direction.
Perfect. Yeah, I think everybody wants to do the right thing. Everybody's got to be, cognizant of the finances as well. So the fact that we're keeping the dialogue open, we're now sharing with them that we're willing to enter in an interlocal agreement. We'll keep this ball rolling, if you will, and we'll get to the solution, I think, that will work for everyone. So we'll move on to the next thing. What time is it? Because we're going to have to... What's that? Sorry, John?
Side conversation.
Oh, okay. The next item is Side Street Ingress, Egress versus Estero Boulevard. Before we start on this, just a reminder that at 10 o'clock we'll be recessing this to take on our special meeting at 10 o'clock. So we'll start the discussion. Whose item was this?
This is a small thing, because this is something that I had a neighbor who had a problem with the town a while ago. But in our comp plan, we discouraged egresses on Estero Boulevard. Now with the after Ian, there's lots of houses that front a beach access or a side street that could potentially move their egress onto that side street. Now, this is in the comp plan. I'm not really saying one way or the other. I think in just trying to get clarity for people trying to build, is that something we want to actively encourage, to move those egresses away from Estero, even though the curb cuts are in, or do we just let things go the way they were?
Ask you, because you live close to a beach access, correct?
I would be affected.
No, I don't
but
mean
it's
it
not
like that.
really.
No, that's not my point. My point is, so you know something about this, I guess is what I'm trying to say, if you think that would have a demonstrable impact on traffic on Estero Boulevard, I support the concept, even if we have to lose a few parking spots. But I would defer to you and our planning staff as to whether that would, if that does have a demonstrable impact on traffic flow. If it does, then I think it's worth looking at. I mean, I think that's your thought, right?
Yeah, and I do know that, like, right now, there's plenty of egresses onto Estero that would not be allowed in today's code because they're too close to an intersection, right? And those are also the ones that could go off the side. But you're right, it would have an effect on parking, and that's probably a very street-specific thing. Some have parking that would be severely affected, others not much of an effect at all. So I'm just trying to get a flavor from the council whether it's something that we want to work towards or whether it's not. It's not an issue.
Anything that impacts traffic congestion favorably, I'm all for considering.
Yeah, I agree.
As well. I mean, anything we can do to alleviate traffic from Estero would be fabulous.
And I'm not sure, maybe the planners can do detail about how much, because I know, if people are trying to back out onto Estero, that is a tough thing.
Nightmare.
But if there's circular driveways where people are pulling out forward, I'm not sure how much of an effect that has.
Well, I think it's something worth looking at. I think we've given staff direction to add another thing.
We will. We'll look into it and give a briefing back to council.
All right, that was a short one.
Yeah. Any further discussion? Councilor King, you have anything to add to that? No, sir. Okay, moving on. Density.
Now, this is something else that I brought up, because as everybody knows, particularly people on council, there's lots of people are rebuilding and lots of people are wanting density. I've had people come to me from a neighbor who has a house and thinks if he's going to rebuild, he might as well build a duplex, to people who want to get triple their density allowance to put in a big development. And I think it's important for me that we're unified in the message that we put out about when these additional densities are allowed and under what conditions. There is a lot of municipalities where they have like a point system where you get points for things like setbacks, green space, workforce housing, beach access, all this kind of stuff, and then you can use those points towards more density or height or whatever you need. But it's a thing where we are setting up essentially a value to these bonuses, these densities bonuses and height bonuses. And so it becomes more of a business decision for the people going in about, I want to do this, but if this is what it's going to cost me, does it make sense from a business standpoint? Instead of having people come in one at a time, talking to town council, coming up with a lot, some things I heard are really smoke and mirrors about things they're going to do to alleviate traffic, and in turn they want triple the density they're allowed.
Yeah, this certainly makes sense. Yeah, I think we have to kind of keep an eye on what's going on in the legislature. Right now, there's a bill out there that could preempt us in a lot of these decisions when it comes to density and workforce housing and things like that. So I think we definitely have to keep a close eye on that to see how that shakes out. I would hate to put a lot of work into something to come up with, which I think makes a lot of sense, Bill, what you're saying. I've always had an issue with public benefit. What is the definition of public benefit? No one can ever seem to give you is it one person? Is it 100 people? It may affect you, it may not affect me. So the definition of public benefit is too open-ended. I think having a system, as you're suggesting, a point system or however you get to that, is to, if you get this, it's this, if that's that. It makes it much easier for decisions to be made on both sides, and it takes away from second guessing. Well, they got this, how come I don't get it? So that's my 2 cents on it. I think we keep a close eye on Senator Passidomo's bill. We don't know a lot about it yet to see how that shakes out through the legislature, because I'd hate to go, 2 steps forward and then we go 3 steps back. So we come up with what we think is a viable solution, and then we're superseded by the state. So,
and I appreciate that. Being a small town like we are in Florida, the acts of preemption is always over our heads, no matter what we do. And but I do think that in the trying to give people clarity, to me, makes this more of a priority. That is probably, to me, it's worth, having staff come up with taking a stab at coming up with a model point system. Then we can modify about what those points are worth. I mean, we're in a beach town, so if someone especially in the south end, would be willing to put in a public beach access, that is a huge public benefit. If we come up with some kind of structure, and the staff can get this from other towns, then we can start discussing what those weights should be, and start to give clarity to people who are looking at planning on what they're going to rebuild.
Vice Mayor, you look like you're ready to say something.
Well, I want to add some things to your list, Councilor Veach. I have been talking to a lot of prospective developers from my individual perspective as a councilor, not on behalf of the council. And as we discuss the need for additional density, many of the small to medium-sized hotels have a real challenge. They cannot build back. They cannot rebuild given the number of rooms that they currently have, because these are hotels and motels that were built in the 60s and 70s. They need more density. And so in return for that density, I think you asked the right question. What is the public benefit that they could offer to the town? And we're going to have a litany of developments coming our way, and redevelopments primarily. Everywhere I go, every opportunity I have, I say, if you want additional density, I would like to see what you're going to do to contribute to traffic congestion mitigation. The traffic congestion piece is a quality of life issue for our island that affects everyone on our island, and it affects our workforce. It affects the quality of life of our residents. And I refuse to discuss, to listen to the concept that there's nothing we can do about it. It's always been this way. It drives me nuts when I hear that. So in my humble opinion, when you ask me to describe what public benefit is, for those where it makes sense, I would like to see a pedestrian walkover on Estero Boulevard, over Estero Boulevard, like Margaritaville has. I'd like to see one at Times Square. I'd like to see one in front of the Lani Kai. I'd like to see one in front of the Red Coconut. All prospective development opportunities or redevelopment opportunities. I'd like to see on the Bayside, I'd like to see a water ferry service that goes to all the various marinas along the Bayside. I think that could be a huge plus for traffic mitigation, also increase quality of life issues for the island. I'd like to see, for those hotels and motels that are smaller, I'd like to see a shuttle service to the airport so people don't have to rent a car. I'd like to see free bike rental. I'd like to see workforce housing for their own workforce so they don't have to drive back and forth on and off the island. I'd like to see the right-of-way issues on Estero Boulevard where we need additional sidewalk for bike paths. If they could cede some of that right-of-way as part of a compromise agreement, I think that would be great. So I like the concept, but I want to make sure that traffic mitigation pieces of that puzzle are part of that public benefit, because to me, that is one of our most significant issues on the island with respect to quality of life. And I like the beach access idea. I think one of the planners I've talked to recently talks about, in fact, I was actually talking, I shouldn't probably say this, but I was talking to the chair of the county commission, and he goes, Jim, why can't we do some of these pocket parks? You know, you have these very small parks that are next to a development that give some green space for the residents, and it could be a beach access as well. And why can't we require that as part of the development process, is that they set aside some of that land for a park, not only for the use and the access, but also for the view corridor. There's a lot of opportunities there, but for me, traffic mitigation is the number one issue in terms of public benefit that they could offer in terms for a request for additional density. That's my rant. I'll leave it at that.
Well, I think to finish, one of the current businesses on the island, which I believe we have all met with individually, said something to me that I thought was very interesting, and it just happens to tie into what you're talking about with traffic, and it has stuck with me. And actually, meeting with some other developers yesterday, I actually said the same thing to them, and it's something to think about. You know, when we talk about parking and we talk about cars and we talk about parking garages, he said something that was very, very moving to me, at least. As a town, we need to decide, do we want to encourage more people to bring cars, or do we want, as a town, to encourage people to leave their cars at the airport and Uber in or shuttle in? Is there an avenue that these developers can provide a service like that to trams, whatever? But I thought it was very interesting that just the simple comment that do we want to entice with parking garages more people to come, or do we not want to do that? And I think that's a discussion that we should have because, you know, depending on how you look at it, parking garages could entice more cars to come, which could not help the traffic situation. So I kind of went off on that, but you were talking about traffic, so I thought I would just add that little point to it, that I thought that was a very important point that I've been chewing on in my discussions with the developers. I don't know that it's necessarily just on the council to decide for the developers what is in their best interest for the town. These are very, very successful people who are very smart, can think outside the box, and I'm challenging them to come with us with ideas for some of the things that you said, Jim, that they are going to need to be able, with today's costs in construction, to be able to build it back and have a viable business and still provide a benefit to the town. So I still encourage any developer or anyone building a house or anything to get creative, think outside the box, come to us with some ideas, and I don't want to speak for my fellow council members, but I think it would be a welcoming thing for this council we would welcome those challenges, I would say.
And I would also, I think that this standard discussion is really very good because we're already talking about ideas that could go into some kind of point system. I do know from kind of the experience we've had on the island that, if you do something like, if someone wants density and they say they're going to do a ferry service, that has to be binding because typically 5 years, 3 years, they'll come back and say, yeah, this doesn't make financial sense, forgetting that the reason why they were doing the ferry service is because they got a financial incentive to do it. As far as the overpass, and I think that maybe one thing we ought to think about putting in the agenda is requiring an overpass if there's a development over a certain size that spans both sides of Estero. So like I'm thinking of the Red Coconut where they're going to, I don't know what the development's going to look like there, but maybe mandate if you have a large development on both sides and you have to put an overpass, and that'll actually be used. I'm very hesitant about putting an overpass where someone can either go across 30 feet of road or upstairs and over and down. People don't even go 10 feet over to go to a crosswalk. The likelihood of using that, unless it's very convenient and attached to a parking garage or some resort, I think that, if we put them up, let's put them up where they're used and they become effective.
I don't disagree with any of that. I would just say that these pedestrian overpasses would be in conjunction with pedestrian guardrails to channel people
Get
to
on.
the crosswalks, to the overpass. And I know you're always going to have a knucklehead who's going to jump over the railing, but you can't legislate for knuckleheads. You've got to do what hopefully will help the most folks on the island.
I remember that was one of the first comments you made was something similar, and my feeling is that usually most people have common sense. It's a knucklehead you have to legislate for. But anyway, the other thing is that and we've talked about it before, is what's the paradigm? Is we trying to get more cars on the island efficiently or more people, as the mayor said? And I think really the only way to get to change that is to come up with a lane for the trolleys that if people are sitting in traffic and they see a trolley go by, they're more likely to take that trolley than seeing one stuck in traffic next to them. That would be a big game changer. Most of the things you're talking about are pretty small. And I know that we can have an effect on traffic. It's very difficult for us to improve traffic, and it'd be very easy for us to make it worse with adding too much density without corresponding alleviating factors.
All right, we're getting close to that 10 o'clock where we have to recess. Is there anyone that has any more discussion about the density at this point? Councilor King?
Good, thank you.
Vice Mayor Adderholt? Councilor Woodson?
No, just that I've had those same conversations with developers, and it's just the right way of thinking. I mean, now is the time. We've got every opportunity to look at that, and I think it'd be foolish on our part not to.
Do you have consensus to have staff just present us some examples of what other municipalities have done for a point system to, as we say, define this big cloud that we're calling, for the public benefit?
I certainly would be open for that.
Yeah, I was going to say, this was an excellent conversation and excellent examples of what are priorities to council. And we'd like to continue that discussion, and I think putting together, we can start a list, generate some more discussion about it, and things can come on, fall off the list. But people are asking now. I attended a meeting with developers the other day also, and they're, what's the town looking for? And so, well, we don't really have that clearly articulated yet, but developers are ready to move in some cases, and so I think it's important for us to proceed with this, have council come together with a list and maybe even a priority or a point system. So we will do that and get it back to council. Thank you.
And should we also look at the idea of requiring an overpass for certain resorts that or developments that are spanning both sides of the road?
Well, I don't think that's a horrible idea.
I think part of it.
I
I think that could be part of the comp plan, quite honestly, and that's what I'd ask our consultant early on in the process, is to build that into the comp plan. But I don't want to limit it to that. I think there may be instances where a pedestrian overpass makes sense. I agree with you, Councilor Veach. We don't need them everywhere, and you want to make them where they're going to be used. But there are situations where one property owner wants something on one side of the street and a different property owner wants something on the other. They happen to be right across from each other. If they could work together to partner, Maybe there's I don't want to limit the opportunities for these pedestrian overpasses because I really think they could be a game changer. Because my mindset on this is that if you notice, and of course everybody's got a different opinion about traffic, but if the traffic is moving, even if it's 5 miles an hour, people are generally okay because it's a beautiful island, there's lots to look at, but it's when it's stopped for an hour for absolutely no reason, that's enough to really drive people insane. And so I think this concept of allowing the traffic to move, constantly be moving, that's why these overpasses I think are so important.
Yeah, I think we all love that view. And view corridor I think is very important, not just to myself, but anyone that's here. As you said, as long as you're moving, you've got something beautiful to look at. So it makes it that much easier. With that, we'll recess our M&P meeting at 10:01, and we'll open up the special meeting at 10:01 on
You need a-
Thursday, February 9th.
You need a motion for that?
Do we need a motion to reset? It's an M&P. Do we need a motion to? Yes. Okay. I'll move to recess our M&P meeting to open up the special meeting for the bid for the beach.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries unanimously. Now we'll call to order at 10:01, 10:01, 10:02, depending on which computer you're looking at. Thursday, February 9th, 2023, special town council meeting for resolution 23-16 ITB-23-08-CD Estero Island Emergency Berm. Oh, I guess I have to go approval of the final agenda. All those, I'll move to approve the final agenda.
Second.
Discussion?
I don't really have an agenda for that.
Oh, you don't, I have it, sorry. The only thing on the agenda is what I just referenced, the resolution.
In that case, I will go along with that.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. Agenda is approved. Administrative agenda, resolution 23-16 ITB 2308 CD Estero Island Emergency Berm. Mr. Attorney?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, late yesterday evening or afternoon, town staff, the town clerk received correspondence from the number 2 ranked bidder, Bergeron Land Development, Inc., challenging the intent to award this bid here today. And therefore, under section 2-486B of the town code, presumptively the bid process is put on hold until the bid challenge is finalized or resolved. Obviously, one way to resolve the matter, much like in the unrelated bid protest that we dealt with, I think 2 meetings ago, is to, assuming staff, town manager and staff are in agreement and make the recommendation, is to throw out the bid and start from scratch.
And what would we be looking at as far as a time frame to redo this? And how would it, maybe this is a question to Mike, and Chad, how is that going to hold us up for the emergency berm? Timing-wise.
Timing-wise, probably about the same amount of time that it would take to process the bid protest, which is the reason why we took similar action on the prior one. The substance of the bid protest by the second-ranked bidder is that the proposed number 1 bidder does not meet the minimum qualifications set forth in the bid documents to do the work in question. And so that would be the issue that would be resolved or dealt with in the bid protest process hearing.
So I guess my question is, say the council decides that they want to send it back to rebid to get back, and it comes back to the exact same thing we're looking at right now through the selection process, are we going to be dealing with the same thing?
Well, I think that the issue that, the threshold issue that staff would have to deal with any bid, the rebid, is evaluating the bid proposers, and to the extent the same issue is raised, whether or not all the bidders meet the minimum qualifications or criteria to be what's deemed to be a responsive and responsible bidder.
So my next question is, this seems to be becoming a pattern. Is there something that we can do policy-wise or staff-wise to get a hold of this? The last thing I want is to see this happen for every single procurement that we're sending out.
One, on first instance, I defer to the town town manager and town staff. But what I would say, in addition to that, and I'll let the manager speak, is that when you have the type of bids that the town council is currently going through, the town is currently going through, of these large numbers, you're likely to receive more bid protests, whether or not they're valid or not, because the amount of money at issue is significant. Certainly, I will defer to staff as to how do we, tighten up, for lack of a better description, the evaluation process and determining whether any particular bidder qualifies as a responsible bidder.
All right, thanks, John. I think before we discuss it, I'd like to hear from Mike as to how who was involved in the selection. Was it just you and Chad, or was it a committee, or how did we get to this selection, and why is it that they were selected?
For the record, Michael Pop, Coastal Engineering. So as your engineer of record, it's our responsibility. Morning. For the record, Michael Poff, Coastal Engineering. As your engineer of record for the project, our company, we reviewed the credentials that were provided in the bid document by Grubb. It included their resumes, their project experience, the other information that's included. And we contacted their references and spoke with the other municipalities that they have worked with. And they have had positive references from multiple counties, Osceola County, City Marathon. I even contacted friends in the business who are familiar with the company that weren't listed on the reference sheet. They have very positive references. They are accustomed to working with heavy construction, debris removal, hurricane recovery, cleanup for local governments. And their primary sub, ICS, is here on Fort Myers Beach right now doing your beach screening and moving the sand into place, into areas just adjacent to where the emergency berm is going to go. So based on that, I rendered a recommendation to move forward with Grubb, because I truly believe they can do the work with the subs that they have proposed, and that the fact that they had positive references. Did they meet the one valuation criteria that says you shall demonstrate projects as a prime contractor placing beach and dune compatible sand on the beach? They did not show that as a prime. But I also will say that Bergeron, the one that's filed this letter, they didn't either. The work that they have in their...
Hold on a second, Mike. You're gonna switch your microphone out.
So to continue, so Bergeron showed work related to moving sediment. They did stormwater treatment areas. They have a bridge project. I would also say that they met the intent because of the work that they have performed is more complex than the work we're asking this contractor to do. So to the question of if we have to rebid it, we could put in the evaluation criteria language that would allow bidders like Grubb and Bergeron and others to qualify for this project. The challenge before us in terms of timing is simply we'll be working further into sea turtle nesting season. There'll be more restrictions on the work. There'll be areas where if a nest is laid and we're not allowed to relocate that particular nest, we'll have to put a buffer around it. It could eliminate some of the areas where the berm is placed. So that's the only issue we have with delaying this by rebidding it.
Well, John, did you say that the time frame rebidding versus moving forward with the current bid through the process is going to be the same? I mean,
under the there's actually three-step process. One, The notice of intent to file bid protest is timely filed, which, based upon my conversations with staff, it appears that Bergeron meets that deadline. They now have a 10-day window in which to file a more detailed formal bid protest, and then either this council would have a hearing on that bid protest where all the parties would have an opportunity to present whatever arguments for or against that they do or they don't meet the requirements of the bid, and a decision is made, or alternatively, you could engage a third party to conduct that hearing for you, make a recommendation, and adopt that recommendation down the road. How soon that can all be scheduled and taken care of, my guess is 30 days or more.
And just for the record, to throw these bids out and rebid it, the procurement time frame, how long would that be?
I would defer to staff. What was the original bid time frame for this particular project? Was it 30 days? 30 days.
Is there, under the state of emergency, or is there anything that we can do to shorten that time frame?
Well, I think that, the fact that this has already been bid out once, and it's, maybe not, maybe we get more respondents. I think that, word is out on the street that we're looking for this type of work, qualified candidates to do the work, and so therefore maybe shorten the bid response period to 15, 20 days.
Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure your question got answered because I was getting ready to ask that same question. John, I'm sure you've thought of this already, but does the town's declaration of emergency or the state's declaration of a state of emergency, does it help us in this? Can we utilize that to?
Well, to be honest with you, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, as well as to the mayor's question, about 2-3 meetings back, when we were going through some of these remedial steps to take care of some of the prior procurements that were done under the emergency process, to incorporate the 2 CFR language and make these projects and these expenditures eligible for reimbursement. The direction of the town council was to go back to our normal bidding process and not rely upon the emergency declarations, because we didn't want to put ourselves or open ourselves up to either bid protest in the first instance, and in the second instance, claims later on in dealing with FEMA and clawback attempts to take that money away.
And I respect that as a general policy, but seems like a very unique, time-sensitive situation here, given all the various deadlines, or is every situation unique and time-sensitive?
I think that all, the current conditions of this town, everything is time-sensitive, frankly, but we are trying to follow your direction, trying to comply with the law. I have stated publicly and to staff on numerous occasions, the further we get away from the landfall of Hurricane Ian, the less likely FEMA is going to say, relying upon the emergency declarations and an emergency procurement process is a valid procurement, and that they will provide for reimbursement.
John, if I could ask you a question, is it, and I don't know if there's an appetite with council for this, but is it more expeditious for council to conduct a hearing at their next scheduled council meeting, or is there a notice deadline for that hearing that we wouldn't be able to make? And then I have a question for Mark also, that if it gets pushed back past the 6-month period of the event, does that trigger any additional requirements from FEMA, such as conducting an EA, which could result in a year or more delay?
So it's a great question. So in communication with the subject matter expert for FEMA, Bob Glasson, he's indicated you have to show true progress on your project. And so the fact that we have plans and specifications and bid documents and advertised for bid allows us to continue, and that's a justification for us for a time extension. So, but regardless of what we do today, we have to ask for that time extension anyway, because we'll start within the 6 months, but there's no way we can finish within 6 months. And you're the first municipality in Florida to advertise for a contractor for emergency work. So that says a lot to the town and to your emphasis on getting recovery efforts done very quickly. So everybody else is trying to catch up to you. So unfortunately, the other thing with waiting 30 days, which sounds like we're going to have to wait no matter what, is we'll be competing with the other municipalities who are catching up to us and advertising their projects.
To the manager's question about the timing of when is the earliest that we could bring the matter back to you for a hearing, I would conservatively estimate the earliest is not the next meeting, but the subsequent meeting, simply because of the time frame. Under our code, the challenger has 10 days. We can't shorten that to, they may take, 9.5 days and hours to file their bid protest. We then have to evaluate it, determine, what information we wish to present to the staff to potentially rebut and argue to the contrary that nothing improper was done, assuming that's the case. And then giving notice to the two other bidders as well as to the bid protester of when the hearing is going to take place.
All right,
So-
we'll bring it back here to the council for discussion as to which direction we want to go. Do we want to send it back for rebid, or do we want to progress down the hearing path? So, and if there are any questions for Mike as well, Vice Mayor. go ahead.
Actually, may I ask a question?
Certainly.
We'll have to make some tweaks to the documents because of sea turtle nesting and other requirements that will happen as we get further into nesting season. That's going to take us a couple days to coordinate with staff and put that together. Can you just wait the 10 days and see what the protest is before you throw out the bids, or you have to throw out the bids now?
To the administration, to you, as to whether or not you want those 10 days now to move forward. I can't speak for whether or not for the challenger, whether or not they're going to in fact file the bid protest. But the last one we had, they waited pretty much the last day of those 10 days to file their formal bid protest. And I can't speak to what will happen here.
I guess let me clarify. So let's say today you decide to throw out the bids and we rebid it. It's going to take us several days to get it back on the street and re-advertised. So we're really talking about a handful of days till the protest would have to be filed by Bergeron. So is it worth, and this is outside of my territory is why I'm asking, is it worth simply tell us to go ahead and get an alternate set of bid documents together in case we need them over the next few days? On day 11, if the protest was not filed, then you
Move
award the
forward,
bid.
Right.
Or at that point, the protest is filed, then you throw the bids out on day 11 and we advertise day 12, and can we go to 21 days? I know municipalities have gone to 21 days instead of 30, and we pick those 10 days back up.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, I guess I'll ask you, Mike. You're the expert in this. You've been very good at answering all of our questions. You've been very informed and very detailed. What would be your preference? What makes the most sense in regards to paperwork, dealing with FEMA, dealing with the state, dealing with turtle time? What makes the most sense to you, in your expert opinion?
I like my plan. I've thought about it on the way up here. And that is, if you're able to answer the questions, yes, which I heard the answer was, if we can advertise for 21 days instead of 30, then we've picked up 9 days. So, with all due respect to Bergeron, I respect all contractors, but their experience is no more closely meets the experience of the minimum evaluation criteria than Grubb. So for them to say that they're recommending Grubb be thrown out, well, they will get thrown out too, and we'd move past them on to the third bidder. So I think if they saw it that way, maybe they're not going to protest. I don't know if they will or not. It's certainly up to them. But I guess we don't really lose anything if we wait, and we have a lot to gain by on day 11. If they don't file this protest, you go to Grubb and you award, and now we don't have to rebid and lose the next 21 days.
Okay. We're
We're hedging our bets.
We'll bring it back here to council for discussion, see if we have any questions for you, Mike, if that's okay, and
Absolutely.
see which direction we want to go.
Sure.
We'll start with Councilor Veach.
No, I like Mike's plan. I like having options going down the road on this. So maybe it'll resolve itself, because particularly if the protester won't get the work by protesting, maybe they won't protest.
So I saw Chad talking. Chad, do you have an idea?
Chad's always got ideas.
Chad was just suggesting, is there a way to save a few days by running the 10-day protest and our solicitation concurrently? So we'd issue a new solicitation, withdraw that if this is cured. Sorry, Chad.
Infinite ways to skin this cat, all of that you all are discussing, which includes moving forward on a parallel track. But under our code, the procurement process as it relates to this specific matter is placed on hold until ultimate decision is made to how we're going to move forward.
Well, I'll add my 2 cents again. Then I guess, I rely heavily on Mike's experience and wisdom for this, and I would make a plea out to the second place bidder to remove their protest. If in fact, in your expert opinion, that they are no more qualified than the people that you as the expert has chosen, I would respectfully ask them to remove their protest so that the community can move forward. We can get our island protected as best as we can, and keep this going, and not hold us up for what it appears is what you've stated is a like for like comparison in skill qualifications. But
This is Michael. Let me just clarify. I think both Grubb and Bergeron are qualified to do the work. In hindsight, which is a beautiful thing, looking at the language we put in there, he had to have experience, comma, with beach and dune construction, compatible sand, comma. That's neither one of those demonstrated that experience in these current bid that they submitted. But we're talking about taking sand from a midland mine, trucking it to the beach, and placing it and grading. So they're both earthwork movers. They both do that kind of work. It's just neither of them showed in their bid documents that they were bringing sand to the beach and doing it in that fashion. Does that clarify things?
no, I think you've been very clear, and,
Okay.
and hopefully
All right.
I've been clear in my
Yes.
plea to them to not hold up progress for our island.
Absolutely.
And allow us to
I think
move
that's
forward.
a valid plea. I would ask, John, is it something, how do we handle communications? Let's say Grubb and Bergeron start calling us. What do we do in that regard?
Within less than an hour of the clerk forwarding me a copy of the notice of intent to challenge filed directly by representatives of Bergeron, I received a call from their attorney while I was out having dinner with my wife. So I will, as soon as you all make a decision here today, one of the things I will be doing is making a call to that attorney and informing him of your decision. So we'll immediately reach out to them.
Great, thank you.
Vice Mayor Adderholt?
I think you stated it well, Mr. Mayor. I concur.
Councilor King, you're going to have to borrow a microphone.
So?
So it appears the direction is to continue to move forward with the process that we have currently and not rebid. John, when you make that call, on behalf of myself, and if the fellow council agrees
Right.
with me, make the very strong plea that we had a very, I think, constructive conversation about this today with our expert,
Yeah,
and let them know that we would respectfully ask them to not hinder the progress of the island, to let us move forward. I'm sure we'll have plenty of other bids out there that they can certainly apply for.
I would not. I also, and want to make sure and confirm that I also heard direction to staff to move forward with the parallel track of if the
Yes.
of developing a new bid document, and that so you all have the ability, if the protest itself is in fact filed within the 10 days, to reserve the right at the next meeting to throw out the bid, and staff to proceed with rebidding.
That is correct.
Okay.
And what is Bergeron currently doing for us? Did you say they
No.
were currently?
No, I think you said Grubb.
A
Or
subcontractor,
subcontractor
Grubbs.
of Grubb is currently working with the town. Okay, I think we have the direction. I'll ask for a motion to adjourn the special meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So,
Second?
second.
Got a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. We are adjourned at 10:25. Oh. Counselor Woodson would like a 10-minute recess to use the lavatory facilities. We'll
And now every-
adjourn back here at 10:35. items for discussion. Letter D, discussion is the fee schedule. Who would like to start this one? Anyone? Well, I guess, what's that? Well, feel free to start it. Was this, I believe you were the one that asked to have this put on the,
Can,
go ahead.
well, I was just going to say I could kind of explain the sequencing here. From this point forward, you can now pass a resolution that would allow changing the fees without ordinance. And so our goal today was there's been discussion about short-term rental fees and I think it's beach vendor fees. And so this is council's opportunity to address those or any others that we can then bring back to the next council meeting.
And just to be clear, we're not voting it. They still have to get consensus to put it on an agenda
Correct.
in a regular town council meeting to make any changes.
Correct.
Yeah, and I don't think that, I mean, we were handed like the entire packet of what fees we have in place, and I don't think we have to go through that entire packet at all, but the two that are most important that really concern our residents and our businesses are the two that you just spoke of. It's the rental fees and the beach vendor parasailing fees. And I don't know if we want to address the Bay Oaks fees because there is no Bay Oaks facility and nothing is happening with that. So at such time that we get to that point, then we could address those fees there.
Yes, that's fine, or certainly if this opens the door for any other considerations on fees, this is the time to start, not the time to finish.
And I kind of agree that, when are we going to be able to start doing Bay Oak services again? And this was something, most of the fee changes that were done, except for a couple, were recommended by staff based on comparisons of other facilities and what they needed to be able to at least, like in Bay Oaks, have the fees pay for 25% of the services. So even with those fees, 75% is paid for by the tax revenues from the town and not from fees from the services.
Start with the parasailing and the beach vendor ones. The Faircloths and the Webbers have done a lot in communications, at least with me. I don't know if they've reached out to the rest of you, but
Yes.
they've done a lot of work in researching. They understand the fee needs to be increased. They understand it hasn't been increased in 26 years. I think they propose a very logical, easy to follow, reasonable request of the 3% per year from the $170, which, depending on which math you use, Excel, Ms. Weber and I went back and forth on an email exchange yesterday about math. I'm old school. I did it an old school way, and her son helped her with a Excel spreadsheet. We came up with what that number would be, but it's somewhere between the $400 and $450 is what that range would be, or what it would be this year. I guess kind of meet in the middle. Maybe say $425 would be a fee that we could change it from what it was, $685. Even when we were discussing these back during the budget in September, I wasn't a fan of that significant increase anyway. So my proposal would be to follow their lead from their research, and the 3% increase per year makes sense. So we'll just say $425 for argument's sake. It's a little higher than her number, a little lower than the number I came up with, but it's kind of in the middle. I think it'd be a fair compromise. And then they also had an issue with, and I believe rightfully so, with the fees being separate between the beach vendor and the parasailing jet skis. To me, again, that makes sense that beach chairs shouldn't be the exact same thing as parasailing. So their suggestion was, again, the 3% fee from the $100 as it accumulates over, I think it was 6 years. I think it's $119 roughly. What it would be this year is what the numbers worked out to be. So I guess my proposal would be to change those two fees to $425 to increase 3% per year for the parasailing and for jet skis, and then the beach vendor, the chair rentals, would be the $119 to increase 3% a year. Again, I hate to restate what I already said, but to me, it's common sense. It makes sense. It's easy to follow. They know what they're dealing with. We know what they're dealing with, and we don't have to spend a lot of time going back and forth.
And you know, the fees were requested by staff, and I understand the kind of math. But a lot of times, I know I hear the people saying about what a huge percentage increase, when the reason why the percentage increase is high is because of the starting number was so low. The usual fee for this starting was just for administration. There is a lot of enforcement that needs to happen with these vendors, and the idea with the fee is to have it pay for the expense of whatever the activity is. So, and I know you're presenting numbers over this number we're going to vote on anyway. Right? This is going
Right.
to have to come up at a regular meeting.
Right.
But I'd like to hear staff pine in on the expenses of enforcement for these things. If not now, then when we do it in a council meeting. Because I do know once we went through this code and I realized what was allowed and what was not allowed, there were certainly vendors, I would say maybe a minority of vendors, who were violating the rules fairly regularly. And that, to me, shows a need of enforcement.
Yeah, I think, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if we're worried about violations, we should go after the violators, not the people that stay in line. And, you know, if we want to raise fees of the violations and leave the actual vendors' fees lower. Because I remember that whole beach furniture vendor, I mean, that started at like $1,200 and some dollars or $1,300. And then we finally got to half of that. And I don't even think that was an actual proposal. I remember being in that meeting. It just was something thrown out and jumped on it. It's just to get it lower for them. So, I mean, I think if there's violations, go after the violators. Don't go after all the people who are doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Well, this isn't going after, this is a fee for enforcement. And as the vice mayor said in previous times, that fines should not be a profit center. And fees are designed not to be profit centers. They pay for enforcement. It's like we pay for police, even though, you know, we may not be breaking the law. We're still paying for it. The other thing is, and this is something that we're working on before, is that the current licensing regiment for a lot of these activities is that people have a license in perpetuity. There's no, there's you know, really, I haven't heard of anybody ever losing their license for activities as one of the, like a jet ski or parasail vendors, even though people have died on some of these tours. So that's something else we're looking into, and I think the fees kind of were more geared towards doing some enforcement when we actually had more leverage in getting people to run their business consistently and safely.
So I think, Bill, I mean, I see what you're saying as far as enforcement, but there are fees for violations in here. I mean, I would be open to a discussion about increasing the violation fee should someone that's not following the rules. You got to make it a point that they don't continue to do that. I'm certainly open to having that discussion. I mean, I think the majority, if not all of our beach vendors have been here a long time. They know the rules. They for the most part, they follow the rules, or they'll work with the town to get in compliance with the rules. So I don't know that it was a fee that would be used a whole lot. You know, I don't think nobody wants to be in violation. So, I mean, if you want to have that discussion, I'm certainly open to it, to increase the violation fees versus, you know, I think everybody's kind of understanding that this council seems to be very fair but firm in not overdoing things, if you will. But again, if you want to have that discussion, I'm certainly willing to have the discussion as far as the violation fees go. But I think it's the right thing to adjust the fees based on the research that they did, because it seems to make sense, and it's in line with other beach communities that do the same thing.
Okay.
I want to thank the mayor and Councilor Woodson for their comments. I'm in concurrence with that. I also think at some point we need to look at doing a prorated basis for the year because of what Ian has brought us. So I'd like to see that done as well.
Yeah, I agree with Councilor King that, you know, if people don't have the ability right now to do their business, then we should prorate the fees they're paying for not being able to do their business.
Right, because the main thing about getting them a new license for this year also has to do with their insurance and everything else. So they have to show that they have the licensing, but we could prorate it. And I'm in total agreement with that.
But now, as far as what you're suggesting, Mayor, can we, would it be okay to ask the town staff to work on not only your suggested permit fees, but also looking at violation fees for these businesses specifically, and seeing if we need to adjust those?
Get the costs on the administrative support costs for violations as well as for the administration of the permits.
I'd be okay with that.
Since we're talking about violation fees, and this is not going to probably go over very well, and I'm hesitant to say it, but I think it's something that needs to be said. I've always had an issue with what we charge for parking violations. I'm a fan of having a lower per hour rate, but the consequences for not paying it should be higher. You know, like currently we're at $35. Simple math tells you if I have to park in a lot that's $40 for the day, why wouldn't I just park my car at a town's parking spot, not pay the fee, leave my car there all day and pay $35?
Totally agree.
It doesn't seem to make sense.
I would just,
I don't know if there's an appetite to do anything with that, but I just wanted, since we're talking about it, to get my thoughts out there.
I would just ask the attorney, because I think a lot of penalties are set by the state and we can't exceed them. Is that the same with parking, John?
I doubt that. I think Sanibel charges $150 for.
Yeah, there are certain, depending upon the nature of the violation, there's a portion of the fine that automatically goes to, you know, clerk of court and some other different agencies. But from a practical standpoint, you know, what you all set as the rate or whatever is up to you. I can tell you that if someone challenges the issuance of a parking ticket, then it gets scheduled before the special magistrate, and probably about 80%, maybe 75% of the time, the person who asks for the hearing doesn't ever show up. And so the special magistrate then imposes the fee, and there's a schedule where it increases, and then there's an administrative fee that also gets imposed to recuperate some of the town's cost in processing it. But the point being is that the challenge in some of these higher fees only come into play if the person who, beyond the person has two options: pay the fine or challenge it. And the increased fines associated with challenging it, again, only come into play if the person asks for a hearing.
But if they just pay it, I mean, if they get a ticket for $150 and they know they're in the wrong, they choose to pay it.
And I just wanted to have the discussion to see if there was any will of the council to want to bring that back at a meeting, you know, get staff to put something together and put it on an agenda so that the public can speak to it, and where it goes is where it goes. But
Could you just restate what your proposal is for that? Because I'm interested in what you're.
so, you know, I was not a fan of the increase from $3 to $5 to park. We've already eliminated the 2-hour time period to which I did not agree with also. But I guess what I'm saying is we don't, in my opinion, I don't think we make it easy for ourselves to only charge $35 for a ticket when the private lot vendors are charging $40 to park. You could save yourself $5 in parking downtown on Old San Carlos and pay the $35 at the end of the day and save yourself $5. I think that, you know, the juice has got to be with the squeeze, you know. So I don't know what that dollar amount is. I think it would be a healthy discussion should the council want
So
to
are
discuss it.
is your suggestion to raise the fine if you exceed your time?
My suggestion would be to lower the $5 back to the $3 to be in line with other areas and increase the fine should you not pay the $3. So if
Okay.
you want to stay for 8 hours in a parking spot, you could pay the $24.
And then you said something else that was new to me, that we don't have a 2-hour limit anymore?
No, at a previous meeting, we gave direction to,
And that
Change.
was, I think, an administrative decision at the time, so we may need to go back and record that in these fee changes also.
So people can park as long as they want in their particular spot anywhere on the island? Is
yeah,
that-
the signs still say 2 hours, but, because we haven't ordered new signs, but I think the town manager raises a very good point that if we're going to redo the signs, if there's a will to have this discussion, let's make sure we get the discussion and make sure the signs say exactly what they're going to be. We don't have to change them again.
If I could posit an even more radical idea, in addition to what you're talking about, Mr. Mayor, I would, and assuming our software allows this,
I know where you're going.
I would love to allow for a 5 to 10 minute grace period for people. I would love for the software to tell people that, hey, your time is up, but because we're Fort Myers Beach and we're thankful for your business, we're going to give you an additional 5 minutes to get back to your car and put or to get your computer out and figure it out. I want to show a sense of hospitality here as opposed to a sort of a punitive gotcha sort of mindset. And I think that little gesture sometimes from a PR and just from a warmth standpoint to our visitors and quite frankly our residents, I've always been intrigued by that concept, and I just don't know if the software allows it. But to me, that's a big piece of the welcoming puzzle, not only to our visitors but to our residents. And it sort of helps soften this gotcha mentality that we're going to get you and we're going to extract as much as we can out of you. And I don't think it would have that much of a fiscal impact to the town. But I just since we're putting everything on the table, that to me is an intriguing concept, and I would yield to staff and the town manager to see if that's even viable.
Well, I know it does give you an alert that your time is running out or getting close to running out. It gives you some, but I don't believe it has your smiley face on there. It says, thank you for coming to Fort Myers Beach, but I'm all in favor of putting your smiling face on there. And maybe you seem to be doing so well with the key questions with key staff. Maybe you need to have a nice recorded video
I'm
of
not
yourself.
looking for any additional visibility here, but I just that concept that we are a hospitality island
Yeah, I
and we're
agree.
a hospitable place to be, and we're not just out there to get you and you missed it by a minute, we're going to get you. It shows a welcoming spirit, and it's hard to translate that into value, but to me, it's something I've always been intrigued about, especially as we sort of shift the paradigm into culture around here. It just would add that as a thought to what you're proposing, Mr. Mayor.
And I had to just say, Jim, that I'm not sure, I mean, how often does that occur? You know, of course, I live next to a beach access, and there's barriers up on the beach access, and people have been moving the barriers and pulling in and parking. They've been pulling in and parking next to the work trucks that are there and blocking them in or not allowing them to get in and do their work. I've seen one beach patrol guy go in the hours and hours and hours I've been working on the yard out there. So if you're unlucky enough to have a guy just happen to go by 2 minutes after your time expired, then you're pretty unlucky. But I appreciate the point.
Well, I do think too, maybe this is an education process. I thought that the software nails you right away. Do you actually have to have a human come by and catch you? Or does the software catch you?
No, the software will let you know that it runs out, but you have to have a human actually come by and
Right.
So
issue
the
ticket.
software itself won't just get you? It won't
No.
just,
No,
so you have to have a human.
The software notifies the parking enforcement.
Attendant, okay,
That,
for-
you know, this slot is should be vacant because it's expired. I have the program, the app on my phone. I use it in different places, different municipalities, and it gives you a notification 30 minutes in advance that you're either, you know, your time is up, and it gives you the option to extend it and to add more money and to, you know, have the slot there for a longer period of time before it kicks in and then notifies the beach patrol staff and the parking patrol staff that spot is now overdue. And if there's a car, then they issue they print out the ticket. So that if you physically need someone to go there, verify that it's the same vehicle or whomever who hasn't paid and issue a ticket.
And that's my question, John, I guess. So from a legal standpoint, you don't envision a day where technology gets so overwhelming that the technology itself will issue the ticket. The legal dynamics require a human to come over there and affirm that? Is that what you, is that?
Yeah, from a practical standpoint, it's generally falls under the heading of due process of law.
Okay. I mean, that's nothing wrong with that. I'm just trying to understand it better, yeah.
Not to get too far in the weeds, but the same issue has been litigated and dealt with on red light cameras, which work the same way. And in that, a computer generates the notice, but before it gets noticed, there's a human element. And as long as there's a human element, the courts have said it's not a violation of due process.
And Mr. Mayor, and I'll ask the town manager this from a technology standpoint as well. I've talked to a number of parking vendors, and they tell me that, and I don't know if our technology has this capacity, that particularly as the town is in somewhat of a fiscal strain right now, I wonder if we could potentially have that $3 rate for residents and that $5 rate for non-residents, and that keep it the same. But I don't know if we have the technology to do that, or if there's
Yeah.
the will to do that.
I'm not opposed to it. I don't know that our software can do that or how it would designate between.
Isn't there a code or something that can be programmed in, like a
There is
resident code?
absolutely. I mean, some of the parking vendors told me that's absolutely possible under their software, but I just don't know if we have that
There
capacity.
may be a way by registering license plates.
Right, and have,
To adjust that fee. I'll check and see. And then also with regards to a grace period, we can certainly instill an administrative policy with our staff. If it's 10 minutes, if it's 9 minutes, whatever, don't give them a ticket. Give them, if they're walking up right then to come drive their car away, don't hand them the ticket as they're getting in their car. But we can look at
I
that.
love the sound of that, Mr. Town Manager. It's just a kinder and gentler. I'm not saying we don't enforce our stuff, just a kinder and gentler approach.
Maybe one things we could do in a future MMP thing is get a presentation and walk through on how the app works, because the one time I used it, I didn't find it that user-friendly, but because I only needed like another 5 minutes or something, and it seemed like I had to go to a half hour instead of 15 or something like that. But that was the one time I used it, and I don't really remember, honestly. Also, I would say that I'm in agreement with the mayor on bringing this up and looking at reducing the rates and increasing the violation cost. That makes sense to me. I don't know, just thinking out of the box, is there something where we could establish just beach parking, and so people don't have to worry about something like that? They could pay either a flat rate or, I don't know, just a thought.
There
And it
already
might
is a
free up
resident.
other spots, or,
There already is a resident pass that people can get. So the idea of doing cheaper for residents, when residents can get a $25, I think it is, pass a
It's
year.
25, yeah.
yeah, but that's only in certain areas, right? Because that's not everywhere.
That's right.
They only have a limited amount of spaces, so if you're not there first thing in the morning on those resident passes, you probably wouldn't get it.
I think it's like, under the bridge, beach accesses.
Well, maybe that's a better route to go, is instead of muddying the waters with residents and non-residents, expanding the parking pass, the resident parking pass, to any stall versus specific locations. I don't know.
I think that's a very interesting concept in and of itself, yeah.
And I would just point out, though, that, trying to reduce the parking rate and including allowing the passes at the new Wasina Way, that has budget implications.
It does.
So when we went through the budget before Ian, we said that there would not be parking passes at Wasina Way, and that gave us more money, estimated money in the budget. If you go and reduce the parking rate back down to 3, boy, I don't have the numbers in front of me. We can certainly get that for the meeting, but that's a huge budget buster.
Well, but again, I agree with the Councilor Veach on that, but if we bifurcate it and give that advantage to our residents, that would certainly help lessen some of the pain of this post-Hurricane Ian world. And I think it would lessen the fiscal impact as well if we continued the 5 for non-residents. But just food for thought. It's a great, we probably need some numbers to look at.
Yeah, and I'm certainly not married to. My bigger thing was opening up the 2-hour minimum. That was a bigger concern of mine than necessarily the $2 an hour, as well as the $35 violation to
Yeah.
just simply not pay anything.
Yeah, because that 2 hour minimum is really meant for the businesses, right, to keep the cars moving.
Well, I will say I certainly learned my lesson over the over the impacts of relieving fees. So your point is well taken. I think if staff can bring us back some numbers of the implications based on previous years of what that could potentially mean financially to the town. That's a very important decision. But perhaps we keep the fees where they are. We adjust the violation, and maybe open up, not necessarily everywhere, but some certain beach accesses, or I don't know how many people that have the town pass are going to drive to a beach access. They're either going to take their bike or walk, but allowing them the ability to do that, it'd be worth having a discussion.
Yeah, I remember there was some complaints when we were doing some work under the bridge where a lot of people parked, a lot of people who live and work on the island parked,
Right.
and that caused some hardship. So I think most of the people who have those passes understand where they can and cannot park.
Right. So I think we've added a lot of things here, Town Manager. Have you been able to keep up with the? So I guess just to recap
Thank you.
what we've covered so far, is to bring back. I guess I'll just speak, and if my fellow council members feel that I'm speaking out of line, please correct me. But I believe the discussion's been to adjust the fees for the parasailing and jet skis to $4.25, to increase 3% per year as brought forth by some of the beach vendors. The beach furniture would go to the $119 currently, and then increase 3% per year. Propose adjusting the violation fees for the same businesses, as well as the parking violation from $35 to whatever the recommendation would be. We really haven't picked a number, but maybe check with other local municipalities and see what their violation is for parking fees. Make sure we're in line. I'm guessing we're probably much lower than everyone else.
I wonder, just back to 3% a year seems, not maybe appropriate the last couple of years, should we say? I wonder if maybe we want to think about a global thing where we come up with a consumer price index change every year and adjust all the fees accordingly.
Well, we certainly could have that discussion. I'll defer to my other colleagues here to see if there's an appetite to entertain that. You're talking about increasing a percentage to all the fees across the board?
Well,
Is
every
that-
fee, as salaries go up and other expenses go up, so does the town's fees. And these fees are meant just to cover the cost of whatever it is that they're allowing you to do. And so it makes sense to have them keep up with the cost. I'm just throwing it out as a suggestion.
And I think that's something to be looked at, but not now.
Right.
Look at that when our beach is up and running and we're back in business in 75% of the areas and that type of thing, and then look at it. I think the only one thing I'd add, Mayor, is to prorate the vendor and parasail
Yep, I was
fees
getting
for
to
this
that.
year.
I was
Oh,
getting
sorry.
to ask the town manager to come back with a recommendation of what would seem fair for a prorated.
Which is not really part of the fee schedule, which is something that I was thinking about. There's also where I would not want to make part of the fee schedule, is right now, if you do work without a permit, there's a 3-time permit fee. Anecdotally, I'm getting a lot of people telling me that they think a lot of people are doing work without a permit, especially early on, is that if we want to have a limited amnesty, I'm thinking like 30 days where maybe they would pay just a standard permit fee or a little more instead of the 3 or 5 times, to encourage people to use that window to get up on their permits, because sooner or later it's gonna come back and bite them.
Councilmember Beach, I will defer to Mr. Popowski, who I know was here before, but has left. But I think that the double permit fee, or whatever the fee is, is actually imposed by the Florida Building Code as set forth by the Florida legislature, not by us.
Okay. So never mind.
Doesn't mean that we can't create an amnesty program, to, get things properly permitted, inspected, and closed out, but the actual fee, I believe, is set by the Florida Building Code. We will verify that.
Okay, and so without the fee, what would if you propose some kind of amnesty, what would it be an amnesty for?
The most common one that I've seen in jurisdictions across the state is a failure to close out a building permit, which presumes that someone actually initially pulled one to begin with. Because again, if you don't, the Florida Building Code says if you fall within this cube, you have to pull a building permit. And if you don't, and then you get caught and you subsequently submit one, you have to pay the enhanced fee. So it's not, again, under the Florida Building Code, we don't have the ability to say, well, we're not going to require you to have a building permit because state law says you must have one.
Well, does anybody have any ideas on how to encourage people who are doing work without a permit to get their permits? Anybody in council have any great ideas?
Well, short of speeding up the process, I mean, I think that's where the frustration starts. I mean, I don't think people intentionally want to go around the system, but I mean, when you can get a hold of a contractor, or when you can do something and you've had your permit in for 30, 45 days and nothing has happened, or you've been bounced back 3 times, that's where the frustration is. My opinion.
And but that would be people who have filed a permit and didn't get one. I mean, a lot of people just did work without a permit. And, a lot of those people may be selling the house or something, which
Yeah,
is
or to
creates a
shore up
problem
their
for new-
home or something. I mean, there were some emergency things that I think people did right off the bat. But, I mean, I think pretty much everybody knows they have to have a permit. I mean, I get the question all the time, do I need a permit for this? And I said, when in doubt, you need a permit. I mean, right now, we need a permit for everything. So, but I think the frustration is, I know some people have been waiting for permits for 3 months. That's the frustration.
Just by way of information, there is on the town's website a list of things specifically you don't need a permit for, and there's a list of things, I think that's the better list, is the list you don't. There's not a lot on that list, but there are some things on that list that it might be helpful for people to look at because that don't require a permit, which I found very helpful.
But I think it's important for people to know too, and that, if you did work without a permit, that, we'll probably eventually get FEMA audits. There will be a lot of things that go on, and you not only could be hurting yourself and maybe whoever you might try to sell that property to, but all your neighbors can be affected with their flood insurance rates. So it is important to come clean eventually.
Councilor, if he's just thinking about your idea, what about, and I would defer to John on this, our town attorney, what about if people self-report? Is there, from a penalty standpoint, is there any grace that they could receive? Are we allowed to give grace if people self-report, or how's that work?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Again, the Florida Building Code states, as well as the town code, what does require a permit and what's exempt. If you don't get a permit, then you're in violation of not only the town code, but state law. I think that self-reporting, assuming the matter gets before, for example, the special magistrate, where historically those type of code violations end up being heard, then the special magistrate can consider the self-reporting in determining what fine, if any, to impose. And certainly if it's the direction of this council that staff would, for staff to make a recommendation to the special magistrate to impose a minimum fine for if they're self-reporting, we'll do so.
A lot to unpack there. Anything further on that, Jim?
No, I just think certainly at some point as much as we can instruct the magistrate's common sense, I assume the magistrate does this anyways. If somebody does find out later that they needed a permit and then they go to the town and self-report, it seems like we ought to show them at least a little bit of grace if we have that opportunity or leeway. I would hope the magistrate would do that.
I know that I've said to prior councils, and to the extent that there are new council members on here, I can tell each and every one of you that as a general matter, a code enforcement case does not get to the special magistrate until all reasonable efforts to gain compliance have been exhausted by staff, and generally the time frame from the initiation of a code enforcement case to it actually being scheduled and heard by the special magistrate sometimes spans 6-7 months. So it is not as if staff is not attempting to obtain compliance voluntarily, and certainly to the extent that any particular violator appears before the special magistrate and says, you know, hey, here are the reasons why I wasn't able to do it earlier or sooner, or whatever the case might be, special magistrate takes those matters into consideration. At least that's my experience.
Very good.
Counselor Woodson, I believe we covered the parasailing, I believe, and the parking. You had mentioned short-term rentals. What are you proposing, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, I think the fee increases that took place there, I think we went from 50 to 300, and then 300 plus 100 per bedroom. So, I mean, personally, I have a short-term rental. The $300 a year truly does not bother me. The additional $100 per bedroom, I thought was just, I don't know where that came from. But we also need, again, to talk about a couple of things. One, that, you know, if you don't have a short-term rental right now, you don't have to renew, and it's not going to hurt you in 2024 when you have rebuilt and you're going back to applying for your short-term rental. I mean, you're not renting this year for the most part. If you are, then to do it on a prorated basis, so maybe by June, people can be up and renting, so they only pay 6 months of that fee of $150 for this year, and then back up to the full amount, or whatever that prorate is. But I think the $100 per bedroom was, I don't think it should be there.
And since I'm the one who suggested putting the $100 bedroom charge on there, I will tell you, and I sent a sheet out to everybody, and Amy has forwarded it to you in your email, where I went through the analysis that I went through. And looking at there's a table on there that looks at the similar municipalities, beach communities, what they charge. The charge, according to AirDNA, which is a website that just tracks statistics of the industry, that the average vacation rental size was 2.1 bedrooms. Given 2 bedrooms, our fee is a little below the average of the area as it is now. The $50 only looked at administrative costs, not anything to do with enforcement, which is essentially a subsidy. And like I said, the fee now is average. The other thing is there's been a lot of newspaper articles that have come out very recently about the effect of short-term rentals. Cape Coral was, one analysis said they were the least affordable housing city in the country, even over New York and whatnot. I think they compare like the salaries and the rental amounts. And the number one reason they say that they're having a housing shortage is because of short-term rentals. They say that they exhaust, let me see, short-term rentals, including those by Airbnb, VRBO, and other websites, keep units out of an exhausted housing market. The other thing they had was HOAs that limit owners' ability to rent. So our fees are average. It directly affects affordability, and it affects what our town is in the future. To me, this is vital, because I've heard people say that we're a resort town, we should just, deal with it that way. To me, we're a mix. We have our residences. I think that our population is shrinking. Short-term rentals are increasing. That things like, if we let this trend continue and we don't put some kind of effort to try to resist this trend, then we're not only not going to have a school, we're going to lose churches, we're going to lose a lot of things that make us a town. I think to me, it's an existential problem that, and I think that this fee is maybe a day's rental on a lot of these houses. And the idea of the per bedroom charge is that the fee is proportional to the income, because the larger the unit you have, the more bedrooms you have, the more money you make from it. And so the fee is meant to follow the income.
Any other comments on that? Vice Mayor Adderhope?
Well, I would say a couple things. I wrestled with this issue in a prior council. I support this going for. I support Councilor Woodson's recommendation going forward to a formal council proceeding. I was concerned procedurally when this was passed before that there was not adequate opportunity for public input. I'm going to reserve judgment on how I vote on this, but procedurally, I'd like to see us have this come before the council in a public setting where we can have public comment and input from both folks who own short-term rentals as well as residents of this island. I'd like to have that public conversation. I think procedurally it just didn't work out very well last time, and I was concerned about that procedurally. I felt like people did not have an opportunity to weigh in, and I think it would be helpful, a helpful public conversation for the town to have this debate, and so I would support this recommendation moving forward at this point.
Councilor King?
Thanks, Vice Mayor, for your comments. I understand and appreciate that, and I agree with that. And Councilor Woodson, I think I'm with you on this. To be consistent, when I was on the other side of this table, I was opposed to those fees. So I'd like to see it addressed.
Can I just add one other thing? When you were talking about, Councilor Beach was talking about the balance. And I do agree with that. I mean, I think that as a community, if we're going to remain a community, we do have to have a balance between rental and actual residents. There's two sides to it, and I don't know if other municipalities do this, but, personally, I know we bought our house while we were both still employed. We used it as vacation rental to help with offset the costs, knowing that at retirement, we were going to move down here. I mean, that is something that is, it's very logical. People do that all the time, but that's just one residence. I don't know if it's common that any municipality puts a limit on how many rentals an individual person or family is allowed to have, or an individual LLC or anything like that. I mean, is there some way when you talk about balance of limiting, you can only have, 2 rentals or 3 rentals within a community that would help offset the resident, vacation rental?
I know in my research there are places that do that. Some places say like one person gets one rental, but we're not allowed to touch our short-term rental ordinance. That would eliminate it entirely by making those kind of changes. But you can even if you haven't done it before, you can require registration. You can charge registration fees, but you can't really change the ordinance itself. And I've talked to numerous people. A lot of places have overlays where some neighborhoods there's none. We kind of had that when the town was formed, it was certain neighborhoods were short-term rentals, and others, if you were doing it and you could prove you can do it, you were grandfathered, so no one lost anything. But the other problem is, and I know there's one town where they, Estes Park, Colorado, right next to the national park, they have a limited number of licenses. But then you get into this taxi medallion thing, where having a license then has almost more value than the property. So, and the fees, the other thing about the fees, and read the sheet I sent out, and if anybody in the public wants that, you can contact Amy and she will forward it to you. It's just, a lot of it's research that I did going into this initially about it. But the other thing is money for workforce housing. That if we don't supply some money for workforce housing, then we're not going to be able to partner with anybody to leverage that money from some of the agencies. Having skin in the game is very important to a lot of these places. And if we get a steady stream of income, it allows us to do some things that become more significant. It's a very expensive island. It's very difficult to do. I think that there's such a need. And when people live on the island and work on the island, they're not driving onto the island during rush hour, and they're not driving off the island in rush hour. So workforce housing is one aspect of density that I think helps actually reduce the strain on our road, our tiny little two-lane road. So I think, to me, the fee is important because without it, we're pretty much saying we're not going to do workforce housing. But again, if there's consensus to put this on the agenda, we can debate all that at that time.
I think also there's another great unknown out there is with Margaritaville and all these potential projects that the Vice Mayor has mentioned coming online. I can envision that would put a dent in these short-term rental issues. So I don't know how that figures in yet, but it's a possibility.
How do you mean, John?
That it would lessen the need it would drive more people to Margaritaville or the projects that are coming up out there instead of looking at renting an Airbnb or a Vrbo or things like that.
And there was I listened to an hour-long radio program on the industry, nationwide, actually kind of internationally, and there was kind of discussions along those lines. But the other thing is that right now the number of short-term rentals are really still climbing rapidly, but some of the people who run them are complaining that they're getting lower vacancy rates now, like the market has become saturated. But the important thing is when these things become short-term rentals, then it's happened a lot in our town that people will buy a house, they will have an annual renter in there, as soon as the lease is up or whatever the month is, they will get rid of them and put it into a short-term rental. It's happened numerous times in my neighborhood. We've even had some staff here at town who had to leave the island because that happened to them. So, there is a real, this is the real yin and yang. And currently, the short-term rentals are winning. I think in 2018 we had 1,250. In 2021 we had 2,500. So we doubled in like 4 years. And along that same time, we lost a lot of the residents here, people who called us a resident. And the phone calls that I've been getting, those really annoying spam calls wanting me to sell my house. I've had a couple were from local realtors that I knew, and I engaged with the people to find out where they're coming from. They're almost all institutional investors. They're people who they're not locals, they're not local residents, they're businesses who are looking at an opportunity, and that opportunity is to rent out short term.
If I could just add to that, to John's point, which is a good question, and it's such an interesting intellectual debate because I've talked to planners on both sides of this as we learn about our smaller and mid-sized hotels who want to rebuild and need additional rooms for density to make their business model work. What impact will that have on the short-term rental market? Will it suppress it? Will it reduce the demand and the need for additional short-term rentals? I heard people say different things on both sides. I don't know if there's a definitive answer for that, but it's a question we should keep asking. And I guess the other piece of this puzzle with respect to this fund that's accumulating as a result of these short-term rental fees, a part of that goes to administer the short-term rental program. But I think the goal, Councilor Veach, and correct me if I'm wrong, your goal is to accumulate some working capital to be able to do innovative and clever things with it. I think we don't really know what we're going to do with it, but we'd certainly be prepared to do something if we needed to, if the funds continue to accumulate. But one of the things that's interesting that I'm seeing is the post-Ian recovery dynamic is some of these smaller hotels are considering building workforce housing on their own property for their own employees because they just literally can't get their employees to work because of the traffic challenges. And to have some of their key employees there on location 24/7, it becomes in the employer's into their own business interest to have workforce housing because they could have folks there to just run the ship and not be stuck in traffic somewhere or have other issues. Plus, quite frankly, it's a recruiting dynamic, particularly if that hotel's on the ocean, even if it's a smaller place, to recruit staff because they're having a hard time recruiting employees. So it's interesting to see how the business model is evolving, where businesses themselves are becoming incented to provide workforce housing as part of their rebuild opportunity. And then there's a unique dynamic that's still in its infancy, but for example, at the Beach Baptist Church, where I've been part of conversations there, where there's a significant opportunity for workforce housing there. And again, hopefully that would be a dynamic which would allow for families to be part of that workforce housing, so we could get some more kids for our school. But my point is, sometimes the private sector and even the public sector can sometimes solve some of these problems. And I guess the question is how advantageous, and it may be, I don't know, that how advantageous is this fund that the town is accumulating to partner and or incent, how critical that is, given the fact that people in the private sector and in the public sector are already doing this on their own. Again, a lot of unknown questions, but good discussion questions.
And
I just wanted, because that's a really good point you were bringing up, Jim. And I know that, I've been in discussions with some businesses that are in the same thing. They already have like maybe some old houses that were workforce housing, like the Pink Shell does. And now they're going to look at, those are probably gone, I assume. So that they're looking at something. And I think that the discussion we had earlier about our kind of table of, bonuses and incentives and all that becomes an important part of that, to encourage people to do that. I think a lot of the demand for some of these businesses is particularly their transient workers, because they'll get people on a work visa from somewhere, and part of their obligation is to provide housing for them, and that becomes a major challenge. Even though they get the workers there, is to where to put them. So I really think the workforce housing program problem is so large that we can't overlook any opportunity. And one potential idea that I've kicked around, and I hate to put too much out that's going to affect the negotiating ability, but I know that that the town manager and the mayor went and looked at an option for an interim town hall that we could purchase, and maybe after our town hall is finished, we could convert something like that into workforce housing down the road. And if we have enough funds to do it, then we don't have to be increasing taxes to be able to do it.
There's certainly some valid points there. I'll go back again to keeping an eye on the current legislative session to see what comes out of that as far as requirements for workforce housing on new development. That, I think, will help steer this conversation as far as workforce housing and the do's and don'ts that we're going to be allowed to do should this pass. With that, I think, Town Manager, you've got a majority that would like to have this brought back at a future meeting for discussion with the public.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other fees in here that any of the counselors would like to address?
One more,
Okay.
and that's the special event fees. And I don't know, I know a couple of them went up significantly last year. I just think that, we're reinstating special event fees, I read. And so I'm just looking at, is there any of this that seems not in line with other municipalities or anything like that? Or if this needs to be looked at, or if people are comfortable with the special event fees?
Councilor Woodson, I think this is worth looking at. I think there's a desire, just listening to this new council and listening to the various comments that folks have made along the campaign trail and just folks that have been here for a while. I think there's a desire to have more events on Fort Myers Beach, and particularly to have them in the off season, and to try to make it easier for people to have events.
Right.
And to have people, instead of sort of going through this jumping of hurdles and adversarial sort of dynamic with the town, it becomes almost painful to try to organize an event, to go through all the various hurdles, to transform that into some kind of a partnership where the town is actually partnering with these entities to put these events on. I'll use one example, is the Sandcastle competition, which is unfortunately, because of COVID and other issues, we haven't had it for a few years. One of the best festivals we have on the island. It's extremely cool. During the off season, brings a ton of people here. It's a first class event, you know. And I've talked to the head of the chamber, and she's like, could the town actually partner with us and have the staff be part of it and help us, you know, set it up and help us tear it down and help us be part of this? It seems like there's an opportunity for us to collaborate with some of our some of these events in a way that better everybody's life here on Fort Myers Beach. And so I'd be happy to look at these fees. I don't know if they disincent anything, but I think it's broader than the fee itself. I think it's the mindset of the town to try to figure out ways to remove hurdles and to partner with them and the fire department and sort of make sure that that there's no hurdles, but also use some of the town's resources to help at some of these events to further the objectives of the event, just so we have more of them, particularly in the off season, so we don't have this cycle. I think Margaritaville will help the cycle, the off season and the season. I think it'll begin to smooth out just a little bit, but these peaks and valleys are really hard on the businesses that try to stay open year round. And the more we can have events in the off season when there isn't the traffic and there isn't the issues, and to stimulate not only for the businesses but also for the residents to have things to do and look forward to. Again, the Sandcastle is the one that comes to mind. That competition was just tremendous, and it was always. I don't want to put the head of the chamber on the spot, but she was always very disappointed at the lack of involvement of the town and how that partnership could make it so much better and so much easier to put on an event like that. But I'm rambling here at this point, but I share your concerns, but I think it's bigger than just the fee, Councilor Woodson. I think you would agree with me on that.
I do. Yeah, I absolutely do. And I think we want to bring in as many events now that we can. You know, obviously safe and that type of thing, and I don't know about the alignment. That's why I bring it up. But I do know there have been big events that have moved off island because of the problems with permitting.
Councilor King, do you have any input on that?
I do not.
Okay.
And I'm just for clarification here, Karen, I'm looking and I see it's a $100 regular special event permit. I mean, you think that $100 is prohibiting people from having events?
No, I don't think it, I think there's so these special events, there's like a number of different components that go in, so that's just one part of it. That's just one part of our fee. But then you also have the fire department permits, the sheriff permit. I mean, there's all kinds of components that go into it, and I think this is just one piece. You know, the beach access wedding permit, that went from nothing or 50 to 350 at this last meeting. I mean, people just want to walk out on the beach and get married. I mean,
No, they still do, let me tell you.
yeah, well, I know they do. And so,
And I think
but
that-
I just think it's a bigger issue to look at.
And, you know, we can certainly look at it, but I remember specifically that beach access wedding permit and the intent, although, of course, this is a little bit out there now, is to drive people to do this at Newton Park, where at the time, there was restrooms, there was shade, there was facilities, as opposed to having a bunch of people gathering at a beach. And I've seen people, of course, being on a beach access, I've seen people have quick weddings out there and leave like little nylon confetti they throw in the air that's now all over the beach. And so, and I think the $100, honestly, like you said, I mean, the fire department, the sheriff or security, they're going to do with, their part. This fee really, I would be surprised that it covers the cost of the town managing that and getting the sheriff and the fire department all doing it. I appreciate special events. I'm not sure if right now, we're looking at the window, seeing buildings still, ready to be torn down, that bringing too many people onto the island in places where it's not safe. I think we need to do that sometime. I'm just not sure if now is the time.
Maybe we put restrictions on where they can have special permits or whatever. I just know that people are anxious to do things and they're going to do it in spite of it. And the less, if we can have a plan, we just need a plan as opposed to all the ad hoc things that keep happening for the sake of the community?
I think I don't think the fees are that egregious. $100 is, in the grand scheme of thing, I think what you're talking about is not necessarily a fee issue, more of a process issue that maybe we need to take a look at to help, because there are so many other entities in some of these that they have to deal with. We can only control what we can control, but maybe direction should be to staff to revisit that special event, and if there's something that they can think of outside the box that could help streamline it or make it easier to entice people when the time is right. I think Councilor Veach raises a very valid point that we can make it as easy as possible to entice people to come and have their event here. But again, I don't think the fee is the issue. I think we covered what potentially could be the issue. Any other discussion on these fees? Any other fees in here that my fellow councilors have any issues with? Hearing none, we'll move on to agenda management. We'll start with you, Councilor King. Is there anything that you'd like to have added to February's agenda management?
Not that I can think of. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Adderholt?
I don't know that this necessarily has to go on an M&P calendar, but I just would be remiss if I didn't bring up the issue, and I've had conversations with the town manager, and I know he's working with staff, but I just want folks to know we're still working on this issue of requiring a separate or a second appraisal. If your first appraisal differs from the county's appraisal more than 35%, not to beat a dead horse, but this concept of that we don't trust the first appraiser who's licensed and puts their license on the line, just as an electrician does or a structural engineer, and that we therefore, particularly during this time of emergency, that we're requiring anybody who wants to rebuild to get a second appraisal. I've heard anywhere from $500 to $2,500. The person I was talking with was $1,500 for a second appraisal. For what? This person wasn't even close to the 50% rule, so there was no incentive to cut corners or do anything. And I've asked. It's a May provision, and the response is, well, that's the way we've always done it, which to me is not a great response. And I know there's probably some thought. I would just, at a minimum, want to give the staff some discretion to be able to say, in this particular instance, you're not even close to the 50% rule. We're not going to require a second one. Empower the staff to have some flexibility to do that. And I know the town manager's looking into it. So I just thought I'd raise that again as an issue that I'm still wrestling with and encourage everybody to think about it. You probably get asked about this on occasion, so just wanted to mention it. That's all I've got.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And just for a little bit more clarity, I did ask, because the question was brought to me. Now I've got my two, in this one instance, now I've got my two appraisals. The second one was $150,000 lower than the first one. So the question was, which one is the town staff going to take? And the answer was the average of the two. So they then average it. So it's there for a specific. It's there for a specific reason with FEMA. It helps protect the town. But I'm certainly open to having a discussion, and I believe the person that you're referring to, I also had a very lengthy conversation with, as well as the town manager, and they were very adamant about it says may, and maybe that's, it may require a second one, and maybe that's the discussion we need to have with our FEMA people, as far as, they're very touchy about if you're not following the codes that you had before the storm, and to change them, how would they look at it?
I don't want to change anything. I just want to muscle up the May.
The muscle up
Yeah.
the May. Well put. Anything else, Vice Mayor Adderholt? Okay. Councilmember Woodson?
The only thing I'd like to get on is still conversations about canal debris cleanup and dredging of canals. Because I think it's been talked about, it's been talked around, it's been talked through, but it would be really nice for people to have some kind of plan or something to, know when their debris is going to be removed from the canals, and then the dredging has to happen in every canal, and as well as the whole intercoastal. So just to have that as an agenda item with some experts, maybe.
Yeah, perhaps a presentation from someone from FDEM who is kind of handling that, I believe, someone from the state.
Yeah, it's two distinct subjects there. One is the current canal debris cleanup, which is a FDM issue and is ongoing. I was made aware this week of a 2004, 2005 effort looking at canals and the need for dredging. A great analysis island-wide of all 40 some odd canals that we have, depths at the time, process, prioritization, that sort of thing. Of course, now that's almost 20 years old and would need to be updated, but it was a great analysis done at the time that if council has that desire, we could certainly update that or at least present to council where that left us in 2005, and then there was no action taken because of the cost at the time, but I think certainly that would allow us to prioritize canals that need it and give us revenue generating options.
And I do think that, I mean, a canal's not a canal. There's a lot of private canals, which of course, if DEM is doing it, it's a different process, different place. I think it needs to be done, but, certainly the more emergency money we can tap in to do that, the better off we are.
All right, we'll discuss that.
Mr.
Councilor
Mayor.
Beach?
Oh, I'm sorry, before I forgot one thing. Mr. Town Manager, you may or may not want to do this publicly, but you had sent a missive out to the council, which I thought was extremely interesting and certainly appropriate given the debate we're having about these easements, or discussion we're having about the easements. You had talked a little bit about the public use if you accept this sand and you sign the easement, and you had a little bit more nuanced approach. Do you want to shed a little light any light on that publicly at this point, or are you still ruminating on that?
No, it was based on my administrative and operative experience and not legal experience. I'll make a real clear distinction there, John. In Escambia County, we had two barrier islands. One property was owned down to the water line. The other one the island actually was owned by the county, and not with 99-year leases to the development on that island, and that was Pensacola Beach, Santa Rosa Island. On the Perdido Key, which was the island that was owned by the private individuals down to the water line, an ECL was established there. It was a stable shoreline in terms of width, but with various hurricanes, we did construct the FEMA berm there and get the easements, that sort of thing. Is this kind of the direction you were? Okay. We did succeed in doing that and had very similar experience to here. A lot of reservations on does that open my land up to public access, tromping across my dunes, that sort of thing. On the public beach island, we had 3 renourishment projects in my history there, along with a couple of the FEMA berms being conducted there. So my experience is with that. And on the privately owned island, which is similar then to us, where the owners own down to the water line, an ECL was established, but it's never been renourished. It hasn't needed it. With the dunes and the emergency berm construction, that was really deemed as a construction easement and monitoring easement only, and not allowing public access. Now, I don't know the real legal status of that, but it wasn't violated. And that was a great selling point there, was that it didn't allow public access, just like some environmental lands or courthouses or other publicly owned buildings don't allow public access, or they restrict public access in some capacity. So that was not an issue there. With regards to Pensacola Beach, the public owned all of the land, but with the lease land stopped at the CCCL, the construction control line, and then everything there was public anyway. So then the question came up within the county of customary use of the beaches, and that was about the time Walton County went to the Supreme Court, and they had discussions about customary use and public public nourishment of beaches. So, and at that time, private property rights prevailed with customary use, and customary use was overruled, is my recollection of it, for those privately owned beachfronts. Is there a specific kind of more specific question here?
No, I just thought that was some additional color that I think helps folks who've got concerns on that front. I just thought it was interesting. I thought it was important to share that publicly.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know the legal implications of what you just said, but
Yeah.
but it is interesting, and maybe this is a little bit more nuanced. I don't know. John, do you have any comment on that, or? Okay.
Yeah, I think the key there was the perspective of the easement for the dunes, that it was strictly a construction easement. It allowed the constructors to come on your property and leave, and then you had a dune, and it allows the state or county to come in periodically and monitor that dune, the elevation of it and the vegetation, that sort of thing. And that was it. That was the extent of it. There was no public access on those dunes.
And I would tell you, because we're asking people to sign this one easement for the berm and the renourishment, I think, right?
Two separate.
Well, I think it's just one.
Same easement.
It's a different operation, but it's the same easement. And that easement itself says that the public will be allowed for a term
Right.
of 15 years. And it also says that the grantor indemnifies the grantee for liability of what happens in an area after it. So I hear what you're saying, and I think most people that I know, if they were to, if it was, the emergency berm saying this is a construction easement to come on, doesn't have any implications on customary use, and you're not indemnifying the person who's doing it, then I think probably people would sign it. But the easement that we have, I think is concerning to a lot of people, and the people I'm hearing about, and actually myself included, I'm not enthusiastic about signing that easement.
And we are reapproaching FEMA on that public access type language there.
All right. Anything else?
For agenda management, or because I know we're
What,
talking
we're
about.
going to make sure, Jim, are you done?
I'm done.
You sure we don't want to come back again? Okay.
Should we muscle up the vice mayor?
Right. Counselor Woodson, do you have anything else to add?
Thank you.
Counselor Veach?
Just one thing, and this is nothing I'm necessarily advocating, but I think it's worth a conversation, is should we consider getting a police department? And the reason I'm asking this is I have full faith in the sheriff. They do a great job. It's just that they are not in our, they're just not in our structure. They're not in our. They don't answer to the town. They have a different chain of command, which made some things a little awkward during the storm. Things like, curfews and working to get people on and off the island. And I don't know what the ramifications are. I think, Mayor, you probably know more. I know that, my understanding of the government light philosophy is that we don't have a police department, a fire department, a library. We don't have even the mosquito abatement district or separate taxable entities. But I just wonder if there's any interest in looking at the numbers, what it would cost for us to have a police department. And then if it's something that there is some interest on, what I would suggest is in the next election, we put a referendum so the public can decide whether they're willing to pay a property tax for that expense.
Does anyone else share Counselor Veach's desire to add this to an MMP for discussion? Counselor Woodson?
I guess I would like to look at the community policing option first. We've talked about that a lot, and then, we had platforms on it when we went through our campaigns and everything, and once the hurricane hit, we haven't had any conversations or discussions about it since. So, I think that's maybe an interim step before we actually go hire a police department or even think about that. I don't know. That's where I'm at.
Well, community policing did pass through the budget this last time.
Right.
So we have been having discussions, the town manager and I, about one, are we in a spot where we can afford to implement that program? Is there a way that we can work with FEMA or with the state to help us fund that, to get that program implemented? So it hasn't been forgotten about. Right now, obviously, since the storm, we have issues that we have to have money for. So that discussion's still there. And it also, if the Lee County Sheriff's Office is able to staff it, it's not, it's a two-sided thing. So those discussions are still ongoing. For me, it's in figure out how do we pay for it. Before the storm, we had budgeted for it. Is it something that we, as a council, want to move forward? I think it would be a very useful resource for us, assuming that we can afford the money currently, and Lee County Sheriff's Office has the staff to be able to implement the program. So, knowing the Lee County Sheriff's Office and Sheriff Carmine, they're going to do whatever we ask them to do. They seem to make things happen. I would be open to trying to push forward with getting this community policing implemented sooner than later, just for some of the issues that we see day to day on the island. Having those people being the face that people get used to seeing, they get that. We won't rehash the whole community policing thing, but we all know the benefits to it. So I'm in agreement with you. I think it's premature to discuss the cost of a town-owned police department. I think we need to work with our community policing officers. It's worked very, very well in Bonita Springs, and they continue to add to it. So I think it's a way of getting what you're trying to accomplish, Councilor Veach, at a much lower cost to the town and the taxpayers.
Well, that's the reason that I brought it up. It's not that I'm necessarily advocating it, but I have no idea what the differential cost is between having our own police force or hiring, like I know that we know how much the community police is cost from the sheriff, but if you hire more than just the amount we talked about, that cost goes up significantly. And when do we get to the point where we just might as well have our own police department? I don't know. Mayor, you mentioned, we had discussion before that there is some money that's refunded. I think it's for resource officers or something. But I do know that like Sanibel pays the same amount for the county that we do, and they have a police force, which I assume comes out of their own budget. I don't know where that comes from. But I don't know what those numbers are. I have no idea what the cost is, and I'd be interested to know before we go too far down the road with community policing. But your talk about community policing brought up something else, is that, the budget that we put together so painstakingly last year seems to be not as relevant, should we say, before the hurricane. There's so many things that have changed, from, Bay Oaks building to Times Square to all this, that do we need to revisit our budget? Do we need to go through and look at the realities of where we are and determine things like, we look at things like community policing, the level of community policing, things in that budget that now maybe we have different needs now, that we need to revisit our budget and just see where we are. And from a standpoint of actually changing, not just getting a report, but that, like, community policing, that's something now, there's more need, there's less money. Where do we go from here?
As a candidate, I met with the sheriff and discussed the community policing, and we came across the idea of grants, federal money out there for that specific purpose for up to about 5 years. The sheriff did share that he has a full-time grant writer on there. So I'd urge us to work with them to try and get that federal money for this program.
Sounds like a good plan to me. I don't know, John, is there something legally, as far as what Councilor Veach was talking about, revisiting the town's budget? Or the
Certainly, at any point in time, you all can take up the budget, and if you decide to obviously make significant changes as far as moving the money around, that would require an adoption of an amended budget, which you can do by resolution, as long as we follow the two public hearing process to do so. Yeah, certainly.
Well, I think, Town Manager, you're working with the finance staff to kind of get where we're at now, projections.
We're working on forecasts of expenses and revenues for a lot of different purposes right now, for loans coming up, and some of the FEMA programs are requiring that analysis anyway. I've thought about that because in general our budget's out the window, for this year. I think some considerations could be that we and this might be another question for the town attorney, but since we would begin our budget cycle anyway in the not too distant future, Chris and I wanted to kind of kick it off in March. Apparently that's earlier than the town traditionally does, but that gives you time for a lot of, crunching numbers, public input, and that sort of thing before you do council meetings in July and September, and then adopt it in September. Anyway, I guess my point would be perhaps adopting an 18-month budget would save us the double work of our finance department to establish an interim budget for this year and then start over in October 1st with a 23-24 budget, that we could go through this process and do an 18-month budget.
Would it be premature to do that now until we get through the legislative session, or at least the special session, to see how their decisions will affect our budget?
We wouldn't have it done probably by the end of that, that would be the end of April before we know what the legislature's going to do. So it'd probably take us that long to put something together anyway.
And it seems to me too, I appreciate what you said, Mayor, but it seems to me that that's not the only moving piece here. It seems like coming up with an 18-month budget with so many unknowns might be a little optimistic.
We are working on forecasts, and maybe we can just come forward with some of our forecasts to the next M&P and kind of start briefing there and see where we want to go.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Yeah, I do too.
Anything else, Councilor Beach?
That's it.
Mine have been covered, so Vice Mayor Adderholt, what would you like to
Just
add?
a clarification, because I know it wasn't meant this way by Councilor Veach, but I'm very concerned because our relationship with the Lee County Sheriff's Department has never been better right now, which I commend the mayor and the town manager for, including my fellow councilors. And to have even the investigation of a town police force on our M&P calendar could send the wrong message. So I just want to make sure that's not going to be on the M&P calendar. I could say to Councilor Veach, just to give him some comfort, just go on the Sanibel website, take a look at their budget numbers. It's a significant cost that they put forward to have their own police department, and certainly a luxury that we could not afford at this time. I understand wanting to understand better what those numbers are, but I would just take a look at Sanibel and get a sense of that, because I'm concerned about even putting it on our M&P calendar just because the optics of it. I just don't want to send the wrong message to the Sheriff's Department at a time when our relationship, again, could not be better. I just don't want it to be misunderstood. And I know you don't mean it that way, but I'm very concerned about that.
Right, because the issue is really more about, control being, and maybe there won't be another storm like this, but it seems like there was a lot of, confusion about, like, is the island open or closed? And, we would try to do things, but the sheriff with their own chain of command did something else. I really appreciate the sheriff. All the officers I've worked with have been great. I don't mean anything to demean them, and probably if we did have a police department, I would imagine there would be officers who would come over and be hired by the police department who maybe work for the sheriff. And you can talk to the sheriff about it. Maybe the sheriff would like that idea more than not. I don't know, because I think I heard somewhere like that there's some state rule, John, you can clarify this, that sheriffs don't patrol. They're made to answer calls. So police fill a different role than the sheriff does. They're not just identical entities.
Well, go ahead.
Can look into that. I'm not. It depends on what level of service and an agreement that you have with a contracted sheriff's department. I do know municipalities that have a standalone interlocal agreement with sheriff's office, where essentially through the use of the sheriff's administrative staff and recruitment staff and the local government funds and uses the services of the sheriff's office to essentially provide for a standalone police department within the municipality. You specify the level of service that you want, how many officers you want, and pursuant to that interlocal agreement, those sheriff's officers much like the community policing concept, only respond to and provide services within the municipal boundaries, unless it's a catastrophic event and there's a mutual aid agreement where they would then go. In addition to that, I think to what you're saying is that on a county-wide basis, the sheriff, is responsible for unincorporated, all unincorporated, wherever it has any interlocal agreements with local governments to provide general police services, and those are generally on a call basis. Does that answer your question? As
I
much as
think-
I can, because I'm not there. I'm not aware that there's a specific distinction. The sheriff, there is case law, and that the sheriff provides police services countywide, obviously primarily in unincorporated areas. And that service, there's not necessarily a specific level of service. It is dictated by how many, what the personnel the sheriff has, how the sheriff's office allocates those resources, and again, from a practical standpoint, what calls for service come in.
I just want to reiterate, I think what Vice Mayor said, and I'm more than happy with the level of service we've been getting from Captain Layler in the West District and the sheriff. I think community policing is the right avenue to go down. We've already got it in place. We just have to figure out how to pay for it now. But I think continuing to work with them, the confusion I think that you were speaking to, Vice Mayor Veach, at the very beginning, I can assure you was not due to anything that the Lee County Sheriff's Office did. They're, as they have said several times, they will do whatever we ask them to do. They've given us more resources than they've been required to since this storm, and we're very thankful for that. I think, as Vice Mayor Adderholt said, we have a very good relationship with them currently. I think keeping it that way is very, very important to me, as well as I think our residents. I think our residents would welcome community policing. They were very vocal, as I'm sure John and Karen can speak, as they were going through their election process, that that was a very big item that they had to discuss. So I would like to try to keep moving forward with that community policing to get them down, especially with some of the issues we've been running into with Times Square, people walking around with open containers, which has become a problem. Things like that I think they can really help out with. We've all seen the people using the center lane as a speedway because of the looky-loos that want to move at 2 miles an hour. So I think that would be a much better use of staff time than trying to research a police force that we certainly cannot afford, and I don't necessarily think is something that we need. Community policing, I think, would do the job. Anything else, Councilor Veach?
Nope.
Okay. I have nothing else to add to that. At this time, anyway, everybody's kind of covered what I was going to talk about. So
That's the thing about going last. It's easy.
Yeah, exactly. With that, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. We're adjourned at 12:03.